I just want to mention that if anyone needs Spanish translation, si usted desea traducción en español, por favor, lo puedes usar aquí. Escanear elija el idioma y léelo o escúchalo con auriculares. Okay, so, y si necesita ayuda, habla conmigo. Gracias. Okay, with that, I would like to introduce Lance LaCour from Galveston County Economic Development.
Thank you, Emma. Well, I am new to Galveston County. I have to say that. I've been here about 3 months, and they recruited me pretty quickly to be on the committee, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm the Director of Economic Development for Galveston County, and one of my roles is to work with companies that are expanding or bringing new projects to the area to consider opportunities, community benefits, changes that new projects bring to the community, and ensuring public awareness. Today's workshop agenda reflects many months of work and discussion of a community planning group, which I was a member of. In addition to my office, the planning group included stakeholders from local and state universities, local government, industry, environmental NGOs, and labor. The result of those many months of conversations and varied perspectives is today's workshop agenda, designed to provide you with an introduction to carbon management, developing technologies, proposed projects, regulation, and public safety infrastructure. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions throughout tonight's presentations. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, and many thanks to the members of that planning group for volunteering their time to help put this together. So I'm going to now introduce our moderator for the evening, Emmanuel Taylor from Energetics.
I appreciate it. All right, hello, how's everyone doing today? Awesome, fantastic. So happy to see everybody here today to be a part of this important conversation. So welcome. Tonight we're going to be discussing many different things, and I wanted to start just by helping to lay the groundwork for our conversation. Okay, so I want to start with just our meeting purpose and intended outcomes. So there are a number of purposes that were intended in organizing this particular event. One of them being an opportunity to learn more about different carbon management strategies, but also an opportunity to be able to voice questions about carbon management infrastructure and about some of the projects that could potentially come to this particular region. So this is an opportunity for dialogue in many different directions. So we have lots of different stakeholders who are represented here today. Folks from local community, government, emergency planning. We have researchers, folks from the federal government as well. And there's an opportunity for everybody to be able to hear from each other, to dialogue and to share their experiences, concerns, and perspectives. Before we jump in, there are a couple things that we think are important. So first, just some principles for discussion and engagement, the first being respect. And so I'll encourage us all to consider this a community of peers. By that I mean that regardless of your years of experience, your technical background, degrees, we all have things that are important to bring to this conversation, including lived experience in this region and in the communities that you are all from, right? And all of those contributions and perspectives are just as important and are vital to being able to move this conversation forward collectively, right? And so we want to honor that, we want to respect that, and we want to make space for that within this conversation as well. We do recognize a few limitations though. We only have so much time here today for this discussion, and so we want to try to do our best to make use of that time. We also recognize we're not going to solve every problem here today, but we are committed to following up. So this is just, this is not even a beginning. This is a continuation of a conversation that's been ongoing and will continue even after this evening is over. But through our discussions today, we can help to fine tune what some of those future conversations look like, what they need to look like in order for everyone to be comfortable in moving forward, whatever that looks like and whatever that means, right? So a number of activities planned. There'll be some presentations. And again, these presentations were selected to be responsive to requests from the community and past conversations that had taken place. And so I know the organizers have done their best to try to focus on contents that were communicated and identified as being as important to community members. There will be many Q&A sessions, so lots of different opportunity to ask questions and engage in conversation. There will also be a panel at the end of our discussion today. You all have seen the exhibits. If we're able to end according to the agenda, then there will be more time after the official agenda has ended to re-engage and continue to network and to share information with one another. A couple of ground rules for discussion. We do want to keep our conversation as constructive as possible. We've already talked about respect, so to that regard, I'm going to ask everybody to avoid things like personal attacks or derogatory comments. We're here to talk about a lot of important issues, and that can be difficult at times, but to the extent possible, we want to make sure that we're being constructive in the way that we're engaging. To that point, timing is very important. I will do my best to try to keep us on time. So for presenters, speakers today, you will see me sitting in the second row. I will be giving you time cues. I have a microphone. I will interrupt you if we start to go past the allotted time. We have planned to have a lot of important things said in 5 minutes or less. It's an almost impossible task. Right, so we recognize that. I'm going to ask each presenter to try to focus on the things you think are most important, to volunteer to the discussion, and everything else we'll try to revisit during the Q&A. During the Q&A, if questions come up that may be more appropriate for a speaker later in the agenda, we may defer those questions as well, just so we make sure we're having the most informed conversation possible. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, awesome. All right, everything else I think well understood. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Susan Hovarka, who is a principal investigator at UT, who's going to be talking about her experience over many years dealing with these technologies. So thank you.
Thanks for having me back here. I did my very first experiment up the road in Dayton. So every time I drive down here, I think about that. Oops. So I'm going to talk about I'm the kickoff speaker. I'm going to focus on the basics of carbon capture and storage 101, but let me start with a little bit of framing. I've been working since the 90s on CCS. I'm a researcher, so I love hard questions. Please ask many hard questions. Many of the questions people are having now as this technology gets more and more real and applied are things that we have asked ourselves before, and I have some data to share with you about when we ask this question, this is the kind of answer we got. So what to do about CO2? A little stage setting. This is what's happening. These are the global emissions. Please come in, there's lots of space here. These are the global emissions per year, not the total amount that's emitted, the per year amount that's emitted. And if we think about people, us, and our in the next 50 years, people living a higher standard of living, having more of the things we like that require energy, and there being more people on Earth, this is the predicted trajectory of CO2 emissions. If we don't want that, the people who do climate modeling say this is the kind of amount of CO2 we need to produce in the future. So the green line, the blue line is to attain a temperature rise of only 2 degrees C. That's 2 degrees globally hotter than we have now. That's almost 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So a lot of people recently have been proposing 1.5 degrees as a more safer target. We should be even stronger. So how do we change from getting the emissions on the red line down to the emissions on the blue or preferably the green line? There's a lot of options, and I'm not going to tell you what the answer is. I don't know it. Most of it is what the people of the world will choose to do. But here's some of the options just to get us started. Efficiency is a big lever. Efficiency, payback on efficiency moves everything, but it can't do it all. Solar energy is very high value. It's been growing in use. I have solar on my house. I love it. Wind is effective in Texas, especially West Texas. We have a lot of wind. Batteries and other kinds of energy storage is important to go with those intermittent sources. Electrification drives everything, converts things that used to be have to use fossil to electrical sources. Hydrogen fuel, some of you heard about hydrogen fuel. You can use hydrogen as another fuel that can be held in a tank. I forgot to put nuclear on here. Biofuels, synfuels, products, a whole array of things that you can make things into things that reduce the carbon emissions. I'm not going to bog because I don't have much time. The one I'm going to talk about is carbon capture and storage. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other things. If we want to get the lower target, we need to remove CO2 from the air. That also requires carbon capture and storage. So there's different texts nested in each other. So why am I going to talk about carbon capture and storage? It's not because it's the only choice, but it's the thing that's that this area, the Gulf Coast in particular, Louisiana and Texas, are hot areas. Why are they hot areas? Because we have a combination of the need in terms of very carbon-intensive industries. We run a lot of air conditioning. We have a lot of fossil involved in our daily lives. We have the subsurface that can accept the CO2 and the knowledge that can put that CO2 in there. So it's been a very attractive. Not everyone can do this. It's an opportunity that's available here, not available other places. So what is carbon capture and storage? If you put CO2 in the atmosphere, it goes everywhere. So what you do here impacts the people in wherever you're thinking of. And what they do affects you. So if we don't want to send the CO2 up in the air to stop it, the CO2 is captured so that before it can go in the air or from the air. And it's compressed because it needs to be dense to be pushed into the earth. And it's transported by pipeline or ship or truck or train if you want. And it's injected, and it's to deep underground. This has to go deep. It has to be deep enough so that the CO2 remains dense phase. So it's required to go deep, about a mile deep, at a selected and permitted site. And you'll hear from EPA what selected and permitted means. Where the CO2 is permanently stored beneath many layers of rock and between the rock grains. So how can we be sure it'll stay underground? Because it's buoyant and it's low viscosity. How do we know it's not going to come out? There are three things that keep it from coming out. One is it's below many layers of rock, deep underground. This is a mile away, and it's through solid rock. Can I have a volunteer? Actually, I'm going to do this. I'll show you how deep it is. This is the well, my well, up there. So walk backwards. So walk back and we'll show how deep it is. So that's how deep it is. Okay, you got it. Now we got to fold it. You're good for folding it up for me too. I keep talking. I don't have the time. Anyway, I wanted to show you how deep it is. So this is 100 feet. So the other thing that keeps it underground is if it's between the many. Thank you, Emmanuel. I made a drama. The other thing that keeps the CO2 is because it's stuck between the layers of sand. So most people don't think about the capillary forces that are between the layers of sand. They think about the CO2 has to go into a cave. It's not a cave. It's between the layers of sand. There's a lot of space. The space that you're most familiar with is in your clothes. So I suggest this experiment. Blow in your clothes or look through them. They're little holes, right? And that's this and there are lots of little holes in your clothes. If you have a raincoat, there's no little holes. So if you spill something on your shirt, it goes in those little holes. Can you get it out? You can wipe with a napkin, you can get a little bit out. Most of it's stuck and you have to do the laundry. So it's very stuck. We call this non-wetting phase residual saturation or hysteresis. That's the technical name for it, but it works the same reason that you have to do laundry. You can't get it out without a lot of work. So that makes it permanent. The third thing is that state and federal regulators require permits, monitoring, and reporting. And you'll hear more about that process, how the rules also assure that these things that I've promised you are actually working as they should.
3 minutes left.
So it's done
3 minutes.
globally. Sometimes people say, why are we the guinea pigs? Why were we the first? Why here? You're part of a global community that's using these technologies. There's a focus here in the Gulf Coast. Here's the first project in Norway since 1996. Here's the clusters on the Gulf Coast. We're right here. You could take one. We have these on the table back there if you want to take one with you. We have a CO2 pipeline. The the green dots are where CO2 is being emitted now. So those are ones you have to get rid of them somehow. You pick. One of the choices is the little red circles are places where those are being captured, planned to be captured. And the squares are places where they can be deep well injected. And this is all up and down the Gulf Coast, these things exist. I don't promise this is all. It keeps changing hourly as people make business deals and announce and don't announce. So some of those circles may have a plan to be reduced and some of them may not.
We have just about a minute to wrap up.
All right. So what are we worried about? Will we have earthquakes? Will it be stored? And will all come out at once? No. No earthquakes here because the rocks can take it. Why do we know? They're soft, they can take it, and because we've injected a great deal of fluid here with no seismicity. And there are no volcanic sources here. We don't have to worry about some of these rapid emissions, and I showed you how stuck it was. Common things we can worry about are, will pipelines blow up? We'll hear a lot more about pipelines, but they don't blow up. They don't catch on fire. CO2 is not flammable. But we have to, and we'll hear more about pipeline risk. There are a lot of old wells here, and I want to show you some. How wells work, how they keep fluids where they belong, and what can go wrong. So wells are supposed to be drilled to keep the zones isolating, and for the most part they do. They have a casing to separate them. They have cement. They have, when they're abandoned, they have cement plugs placed. Most wells, about 990 out of 1,000, work very well. We have, but there are those yahoos that make the news. So how do you know there's not one near you? They're not constructed correctly. Over time, they could be damaged, or records would be lost. They could be forgotten. They're not cased and cemented to modern standards. They may not be maintained, or they're not plugged correctly. We have ways to manage this. It's in the law, but it's a legitimate thing for people in this area. We have lots of wells to know about and say, how did you do these prevent these things from happening to wells near me? So that's the place that rules say, the rules tell us to pay attention to the existing wells. Thanks, I could answer questions.
Anybody has questions? Yep, we got a mic coming around.
Could you go back to that slide that showed the projects in the area? Because I saw that there were 2 injection. This
Whoops.
is my.
I'm good.
Yeah. Okay.
It's on the, so, oops.
Yeah, that one right there. I'm just wondering because you had like the BP West Bay and then this Lone Star Carbon Safe.
I think that's the same project.
That's what I was wondering.
This is,
they are,
I think
yeah.
they leased 2 acreages from separate agencies. So this, you have to read the small print. The projects that we use public information because we didn't want to leak things we knew that I know personally that they're the same because I know Chris. But, yeah. So and I won't swear to any of this because it keeps changing as people change their minds and more things are announced. But it gives you an idea. Here, these for source from Carbon Management Connect, CCUS map, Clean Air Task Force, the EPA permitting files, Louisiana permitting files. And we're glad to tell you what we know about how to. So there's more announced. There's more on that CCUS map. And Clean Air Task Force.
And
Yeah.
I'll note also that these slides are going to be distributed after the event, so the resources will be accessible to everybody.
It won't make it any more correct than it is, though. It's a rapidly expanding area. Who's doing what where?
I believe we have another question.
Yes, thank you. So you were giving the example of spilling something on your shirt and, you said you could get some of it out. I imagine the more that is spilled on it, the more that you could get out, right? So I imagine there's a cap to how much can be stored in a certain place.
Yes.
When is that cap set and how is it regulated and ensured that they're not putting
It's
in
one
more?
of the geologist's job to find a site and then to calculate how much it can accept. The thing that limits the amount that can go in is mostly the pressure acceptance. You have to inject at pressures that are below the strength of the rock, above the water pressure, but below the strength of the rock. So you have to inject at a certain pressure at a certain amount, and you can't go over that pressure. It's called a maximum allowable pressure. It's set by the Safe Drinking Water Act to limits so that's determined how much can go in. And it's an important calculation to be justified in the permit that you've done that correctly. And I could talk to you for hours about this topic. You make measurements of the available pore space, and you see how well connected it is, so that the CO2 is going to push away the fluids that are there, and there has to be room for them to be pushed away. And the whole thing has to be blown up like an air mattress, but not overblown up, right? The air mattress has a limit. You can't pump it up and break it, but you want to. So that's how you pump it full and it has to have enough space to accept the injected fluid. Yes.
And then my other question was, you mentioned that 990 out of 1,000 work really well, so about 99% of them.
Yeah.
So do you know what the rate is in Texas?
Yeah, that's the rate in Texas. So
That's
you
the
could,
Texas
if you
rate?
want to count it yourself, I had a student who did it and went and talked to the Railroad Commission, and they went through the Railroad Commission's blowout file. It's online. Railroad Commission blowout. You'll find all the non-conformant wells in Texas. All of them most of them aren't CO2 wells. It'll just give you an idea how all wells perform. And we got about, I think I said that wrong. We had about 1 in 1,000 per year had a problem that was reportable. That was of injection wells. This is so it's not a very high rate, and most of them were not very catastrophic. They were non-conformant. Something had to be fixed, and they had to report to the regulator. But they weren't. Again, it's not a very high failure rate. So you can look at the consequences, see whether some of them were. So you can look at the blowout files and see what the consequences were. Mostly they had to truck off so many truckloads of contaminated earth, but it's a general thing.
And is this self-reporting? Are these self-reported?
Well, both. I mean, many things the operator has penalty if they don't report, so they do. But if they get caught not reporting, and actually, as I'll punt that question to regulators. Actually.
Okay.
So.
Okay. If I could get an answer, just because I'm curious, which is the regulator for something like that?
So EPA is here. And the EPA Region 6 has regulation right now over Class 6 in Texas and the Railroad Commission is applying for primacy. So if they're successful in getting primacy, they will become the regulator. That's what the Texas legislature decided the Railroad Commission was to be the one to be assigned primacy. So there it is.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
I impressed everybody with the depth. They just became very secure in CO2 storage.
All right, well, thank you so much. Let's give Susan a quick thank you. All right, appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to move to next segment in our agenda. So the overall theme is going to be safety and emergency response. We have a number of different speakers. The first two will be addressing air quality, and we're going to be joined next by Jason Moore, who is an environmental investigator here in Galveston County.
I'll just use the thing.
Perfect. Yeah.
Good evening. Everybody hear me? Okay, good. I'm used to doing more familiar, more one-on-one conversations, so this is a little different. But okay, so there we go. A week or two ago, I got our public health emergency preparedness person came up and said, "Hey, I got asked to do this talk, but I don't know much about air quality, so can you go talk about it?" I said, "Okay, sure." But then I got to thinking, what do I know about carbon management? It's not something we do necessarily in the public health sphere on a day-to-day basis. But I've already learned a little bit tonight, and I can't lie, I was nerding out a little bit earlier, and on your talk just now, that has brought me up to speed very quickly. But why does public health want to come and talk about this? Ultimately, it's because public health is going to exist where risk meets the community, and that can mean anything. I deal with air pollution. So that's what we're going to deal with. Obviously, we have our regular sources of contaminants of all sorts, not just carbon, but other stuff. And of course, over here, just how it moves through the environment and therefore how it interacts with people. And if you guys have questions later on, please come catch up with me. I'm going to try and keep it fast-paced. Biggest thing I want to do is introduce the health district and public health here. We have our fingers in a lot of pies. So that's what you see up there. Don't worry about each and every single one. Like I said, we do a lot of different things, whether it's from vaccinations to air and water to epidemiology, all kinds of stuff, just depending on what we need at the time. The part I want to focus on is this one little circle right here. That's us. And then one other element. This is the exact same graphic, but obviously it's got a big bright yellow background. That's because all of it is encircled by the community. Whether we're dealing with it at any of these groups, we're all talking, going back and forth with the community. So if we zoom in a little bit, this is my same air and water circle. But then we have all these other people we're talking to. These are other parts of the health district, other agencies all over the place, federal, state, other local, even utilities and individual business entities. But again, we're all interacting with the community back and forth. That's why we're here. Some of the things we do in our air and water group, our environmental group, air monitoring, we do facility inspections, we do complaint investigations on the air side. On the water side, we do grease trap inspections, we do wastewater plant inspections, we monitor stormwater. We're involved with the Beach Watch program that the Texas GLO runs. And again, we also do complaint inspections. On our water monitoring side, some of the fun toys we use, some high tech, some not so high tech, but all very useful. Do complaints. This was actually a bayou that was not looking the right color. We found out it was some tannins leaching from a mulch facility, or not mulch facility, but a waste facility, a timber limb, woody refuse kind of stuff. We were able to bounce back to the state because it was out of the county and they fixed it. Some of our there's some pictures from some wastewater plants. There's some of the inspections we do, make sure things are running properly. On our air side, we have a couple of primary programs. One, we do monitor PM10 particulates, and that's going to be usually associated with heavy industry. Then we also do our complaint investigations, which are mostly be things like odor, visible emissions like dust and smoke. These are actually some of our PM10 monitors way up here. And this is actually a newer monitor that we're looking to install right now, which should get us more frequent data, which will be kind of nice. So move into the modern world.
1 minute left.
1 minute. Oh, moving fast. We're working also in expanding into some gas monitoring, as well as some PM 2.5, which is a smaller particulate, which is going to be more geared with other kinds of activity. But what does that have to do with carbon management? It's because environmental change means new challenges. So severe weather, sea level rise, changing weather patterns. Obviously, we have some good, meteorological carnage here. This is Bolivar Peninsula after Hurricane Ike. This was Hurricane Harvey. This is Galveston. This is about 8 blocks from my house. This was further up in Houston. And the thing I really wanted to point out on this one is right here, this little bit, this is a wastewater plant. So this is something else that we deal with. So things we want to watch. This was Hurricane Beryl right here just a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, excuse me. And then this was yesterday. So this was about this time yesterday, right before Milton made landfall. Sea level rise, these are high tide events. This is in Fredericksville, pretty much due west from here. This was just a high tide. This wasn't associated directly with a storm. And then, of course, as weather patterns change, this is that same graphic we looked at earlier. The wind's blowing this way, that weather pattern changes, it may blow the other way. It may affect the community entirely differently. The rainfall may change and change drainage patterns, all kinds of stuff. Ultimately, like I said, we're trying to exist in that space where risk meets people, and how do we deal with it? How do we monitor it? How do we mitigate it? How do we recover from it? So with that, I think it's just public health, and every other part needs to be part of that conversation. So, questions? My contact information's there for later on. Anybody has questions, come find me. I'll give you a business card, whatever you need. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason. We're going to have one more presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A with both you and the next speaker as well.
Okay,
All right. So next, I'll just quickly welcome Sarah Hamilton, who is with DOE's Carbon Capture Air Quality Studies Division. Sarah is a Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow in the Office of Carbon Management. So thanks so much for being with us.
Hey everyone, excited to be here today and learn from all of you. My name is Sarah Hamilton. I work at the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. And today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the studies we've been doing to understand the air quality impacts of carbon capture. A little bit about me. I'm an engineer and a scientist. I've been working on carbon management since my PhD. Here are some pictures of me working in the lab and visiting different carbon capture projects around the world. So that's me. Now, in the Office of Carbon Management, we are working on technologies to systematically remove carbon capture from the air or from a point source, transport it, send it to permanent storage, or convert it to a product. Now, different divisions in our office work on different parts of this map. I'm specifically going to be focusing on point source carbon capture. We've been working on carbon capture at the Department of Energy for a long time now. We started off in 2008 looking at fundamental science and developing new types of carbon management technologies, carbon capture technologies. Since then, we've moved on to scale up and building these technologies at engineering scale, and also leveraging all the learnings that we've acquired in this process to apply carbon capture to other types of industries and to direct air capture as well. We're also interested in understanding the broader impacts of deployment of carbon management technologies, including air quality impacts and co-benefits. Now, what do we mean when we say co-benefits in terms of air quality of point source carbon capture? So let's take a look at a point source over here that's producing carbon dioxide as well as other co-pollutants in the process. These co-pollutants include particulate matter, SOx, and NOx. Now, when we apply a carbon capture facility to remove CO2 from that process, we have this carbon capture system here that's capturing CO2 produced in the flue gas, and that would be sent either to storage or to a conversion process. Now, this carbon capture facility also has a polishing system that's going to reduce the concentration of some of those other co-pollutants, including particulate matter, SOx, and NOx, and that can provide air quality benefits. That's what we refer to as co-benefits. Now, these co-benefits are going to vary across facilities, so it's important to understand what those are. There have been very few studies actually collecting that data, so at the Department of Energy, we're looking to fill that data gap by collecting data on co-pollutant removal in various facilities, including the National Carbon Capture Center and other pilot facilities across the country. So that data will be made publicly available in our carbon management resources portal once it's been processed and understood. So I encourage you to take a look at this. There's also plenty of other resources on carbon capture in this portal. Okay, so we've talked about co-pollutant removal. Something else that we're also working on in terms of air quality related to carbon capture is possible secondary emissions associated with the breakdown of materials that we use to capture the CO2. So these materials can produce other secondary emissions over time, and it's important that we measure, manage, and avoid these. So we've been working at DOE on various aspects related to this. Just to give you some examples, first I wanted to highlight that we are doing R&D on new carbon capture technologies that will eliminate those secondary emissions. We're also implementing engineering controls, so there are ways that we can control those secondary emissions and prevent them from entering the atmosphere. And we're also developing a mobile emissions laboratory that will be traveling between different carbon capture facilities and measure everything that's coming out of the stack. So we've been working on this for the last year. I'm really excited about it. It's just going online this month, and that's equipped with the latest and most accurate analytical measurements that will detect any possible secondary emissions. So that's all I wanted to share with you. If you have any other questions about carbon capture or what FECM does, please come and talk to me or anyone else from FECM, and we'll try and get you answers. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'll take any questions you may have for either Sarah or for Jason. Jason, you're welcome to join us back up at the front if you'd like to.
I have a question for each of you. Jason, can you talk about, I guess, what the risks of carbon in the public sphere are, and what equipment or standards do you all use to currently test for carbon?
Okay, so like I was saying, I was nerding out learning here a little bit this evening. This isn't something that up to this point, that at least as a local health authority, that we've done a whole lot with. So like I said, we're kind of very much on the learning side. I did actually have a very good conversation with the Department of Transportation folks, actually starting to learn some of that stuff itself. I think our biggest thing to watch would probably be what's going to happen at the surface, as we're dealing usually with immediate stuff. Just as a background, our usual stock and trade is going to be the stuff that happens quick, the stuff that's going to be immediately infectious, toxic, what have you. That's probably the kind of thing where we'd be involved. And then where we're not going to be the only source of information, where we don't know everything, we're going to reach out. It may be to an industrial expert, it may be to other local OEMs, it may be to state agents or federal agencies. Joe, I'm going to throw you under the bus just real quick. We actually have one of our, the Texas City emergency manager back here today, so he's one of the ones we talk with the most. I've actually learned a whole lot from this gentleman just over the last few months that I've been in this job. So,
Thank you. A follow-up question. What assessments do you all do for cumulative impact? You know, because this industry is kind of already inundated with a lot of risks from other industries. How does this additional risk sort of play into your all's safety assessment and how to tackle that?
the short answer is going to be that I'm still learning.
That's fair. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. That's what we're here for. My question for Sarah was, I noticed that when Sue was up presenting, we talked about carbon management and all the different sort of components of carbon management. But then in your presentation, carbon management equals carbon capture technology. Does the DOE consider energy efficiency, other renewable energies as part of the carbon management conversation? Yeah, right there.
Yeah, so this is what we work on in the Carbon Management Office at DOE. It's not exclusively carbon capture. Sorry if I misrepresented that, but it's everything that's in this map. So it's a system of technologies to capture carbon dioxide and dispose of it in some manner. So our office covers point source carbon capture, carbon dioxide removal, transport conversion, and storage. So this is everything that falls under the DOE's definition of carbon management. There are multiple other offices at the Department of Energy that work on all those wedges that Sue showed us. ERE, which is the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, covers solar, batteries, hydrogen, and we actually collaborate with a lot of those offices as well. So for example, in the point source carbon capture team, we talked to the Industrial Efficiency Decarbonization Office in IEDO because our mission aligns in a lot of ways. So this is what our office does, but we are engaged with the other offices at DOE that are covering the other solutions as well.
Do you think it'd be possible to kind of have the DOE sort of expand on that difference, right? Because I think when we talk about carbon management, it should include sort of all the other topics that Sue had mentioned, and maybe just so that we kind of clear up the language and make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's always good to clear up the language. We actually just released the carbon management strategy today, so you're asking this at a good time. And the definition of carbon management that DOE uses is very clearly laid out, as well as how we integrate with the broader mission of decarbonization at DOE. So I can send you that link. But yeah, happy to clarify further if needed.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, Dominic, that I know that in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, we are doing some feed studies that look at how can we use renewable sources of energy to power the direct air capture facilities that could be built in the future, because those facilities use a lot of energy. So obviously we don't want to be using fossil sources to power those, otherwise we're not going to get the benefits for climate that we want. Yep. Yep. And I can follow up.
Thank you for the presentation. And what factors influence whether the CO2 will be converted or permanently stored? And then a second follow-up to that is, with respect to air quality, I believe permanent storage will be better, right? And then why should we not just go for that? Why would we decide to convert instead of storing permanently?
Yeah, that's a really awesome question. So what we end up doing with the CO2 will be, in a lot of cases, location specific. So most of the CO2 for a climate benefit needs to be stored permanently, because we just simply do not have enough products to make with all the CO2 that we're going to have to capture. So most of the CO2 is going to have to go to permanent storage. However, the role of conversion is really that a lot of the world around us is made up of carbon. So we need to find a way to displace that carbon and one potential way is to use CO2 that we're capturing from various sources. So for example, we can use CO2 to make building materials, to make the buildings around us, CO2 to make polymers, to make some of the clothes we wear. So there are cases where using CO2 is advantageous to kind of replace some of those carbon sources. But from a climate perspective, most of that CO2 is going to have to go to permanent geological storage. Now back to the project-specific side of things. And there are some locations where we have a CO2 emitting point source, but there's no geological storage option. We don't have those rocks that can take up the CO2. In those cases, it might make sense to have a conversion facility. So that's kind of how some of those decisions are made. But hopefully that clarified, yeah.
Okay, just a quick note, did a quick lookup. DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy is 2.5 times larger than fossil energy and carbon management in terms of annual investment. So I did want to just offer that to the conversation as well.
We have time for one more question.
Yes, we do, yep.
Hi, Miss Sarah. Thank you for being here. So you talked about how exciting R&D was. How long is the typical time frame, years or whatever, for that to tear down to reach the public industry to benefit the general consensus?
Okay, so
is there a generalized time frame?
Yeah, so I would say if we are starting to develop a technology in the lab, so a new type of carbon capture material, the time frame for that to go through the different scales of deployment, which would be, first really understanding it at the lab scale, then having a small pilot to make sure it works at some intermediate scale, scaling up, then having an industrial facility, that would be 10 to 15 years at the minimum. However, we do have plenty of carbon capture technologies that have already gone through those lab scale, small pilot, large pilot phases. So those are ready for deployment now. But if we were starting from, a new material that I just made up tomorrow, that would be kind of how long it takes. Does that make sense?
Is there a place on your website that you can go, a generalized person, and see that data or that information of what y'all have come up with?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can point you to that website. I'll find you after, and I can also make that publicly available and like an add-on slide to everyone as well. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay, so we are at time for this particular segment. Thanks again to our presenters and also for all the questions. Okay, so we're going to continue to move forward. The next segment of our agenda also focuses on safety and emergency response, but with a more particular focus on regulations. So first, we're going to be hearing from Sharon Newman, who is with the US EPA and has a background in physical sciences. So thank you so much for being with us today.
All right, hello everyone. All right, hi everyone, I'm Sharon Newman. I work at EPA headquarters. I'm in the Underground Injection Control Program. EPA's authority over the Underground Injection Control Program, or the UIC program, comes from the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, this act directed EPA to develop a program that protects underground sources of drinking water from injection activities. So subsequently, EPA developed the Underground Injection Control Program, or UIC program, which regulates the injection of fluids underground for the purposes of storage or disposal. And so here, when we're talking about fluids, we're meaning things like water, wastewater, brine from oil and gas production, and carbon dioxide. Now, the purpose of the UIC program is the protection of underground sources of drinking water. The UIC program regulates an injection well throughout the lifetime of that project. So that's all the way from site characterization all the way to site closure. In addition, the UIC program oversees the permitting of the well and for the injection of carbon dioxide. This involves a rigorous review process. The program also ensures that required reporting and monitoring reports are submitted and also conducts site inspections, and this is throughout the lifetime of the project. Now, there are 6 classes of UIC wells, and these are categorized by the type of injection activity. We're here today to talk about Class 6, which is for the injection of carbon dioxide underground for the purposes of long-term storage, also known as geologic sequestration. Now, the Safe Drinking Water Act also allows a process by which states, tribes, and territories can apply for, and if approved by EPA, receive oversight of the UIC program. This is called UIC primacy. In all states, tribes, and territories that do not have UIC primacy, EPA directly implements the UIC program. So here in Texas, the Texas Railroad Commission has primacy for Class 2 wells, which are for oil and gas production, and the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has primacy for Classes 1, 3, and 5. The Class 6 rule takes into account and manages the unique nature of carbon dioxide injection. And in fact, the Class 6 regulations are some of the most stringent in the UIC program. So as part of this regulation, carbon dioxide must be contained within the injection zone and must not leak into outside of that injection zone. And this is done through extensive site characterization, to ensure that there's a confining layer to prevent vertical leakage of the carbon dioxide. In addition, there is a requirement to evaluate if there are any artificial penetrations in the area. So that's things like orphaned or abandoned wells. If those exist within the area around the injection well, they must be shown that no leakage will occur through them so that the CO2 is contained. Now, we understand that many communities are concerned about the possibility of seismicity. The Class 6 rule has safeguards for this, including that the applicant must demonstrate that the area, they must demonstrate the seismic history of the area and show that if there are any faults or fractures, that they are seismically inactive and won't hinder CO2 containment. EPA also recommends seismic monitoring throughout the lifetime of the project, and this is to detect any seismic activity occurring in the subsurface, and no matter how small. So even if it can't be felt at the surface, this seismic monitoring would immediately identify anything happening. Action could be taken, such as reducing the injection rate, so that no future seismic activity occurs.
2 minutes left.
Thank you. So just quickly, I want to go over the Class 6 permitting process. Now, the Class 6 permitting process involves a technical review phase, which typically lasts around 18 months. And that is part of that rigorous review process that I spoke about earlier, and involves things like evaluation of site characterization, the well construction plan, review of the emergency and remedial response plan, and also applicants must demonstrate financial responsibility throughout the lifetime of the project so that the public does not bear the cost of that project. EPA also strives for transparency throughout the Class 6 project. There are also opportunities for public participation. As part of the regulations, there is a public comment period that goes along with the draft permit, as well as a possible hearing where folks can, in the local community and the public, can submit comments and voice their concerns, and EPA will take that into account before making any final permitting decision. And so I just wanted to end on a few resources and tools that are available on our website. I think I might be running out of time, so and this is a very long list, so please visit our website. All these are linked directly from the landing page. And then lastly, just want to leave you with some contact information at the bottom of the screen in case you have any questions after this event. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Appreciate your remarks, Sharon. And next we have James Prothero, who is with the U.S. Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, known as PHMSA. We'll be talking about CO2 pipeline safety.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. I'll be as brief as I can. One of the reasons I'm here is to kind of clarify what how PHMSA is involved and what our authorities are with respect to CO2 and CO2 pipelines. PHMSA is the agency that sets regulations, rewrites regulations, updates regulations, and engages with the operators to ensure that pipelines are operated safely across the U.S. We do have authority to enforce where we find situations where pipeline operators might not be complying with the regulations, and we can issue fines and do things like that. So we do inspect and audit records of pipeline operators. We do inspect facilities on site when we need to or when we do an inspection. Further, we do have an R&D program where we look at new technologies or coming technologies to evaluate them to see how they can help improve the safety of pipeline facilities. And we also provide a number of grants to states, to universities, and to others, to our fire services or emergency services organizations to help improve safety in pipelines. So with respect to CO2 pipelines, PHMSA has had regulatory oversight since the 70s for supercritical pipelines under our Part 195 of the regulations. That's the liquid side. And then we also have safety authority over all of those, plus the few gaseous pipelines that are in place today. But we are working on the new regulation for the gaseous side. So with respect to CO2 lines, as I've just told you, I'm not going to repeat it, but yes, we have oversight for those lines. What we don't have oversight for is we have no siting authority, so pipelines can be built wherever the communities they're built in and the operators decide to build them. We don't have anything to do with any of the equipment production or anything that goes on in the storage field. It's just the transportation within the pipe itself. This is a quick slide that shows out of the 3.2 million miles of pipe that PHMSA has authority or statutory authority to cover, there's about 5,340 existing miles of CO2 pipelines in place today. Most of that, as I've already said, is supercritical or liquid. If you look for your local county, You can see there's just a little bit of pipe here in Galveston County. I don't know the number exactly how many miles, but it's not a lot. It's maybe 30 or 40 miles of pipe that you currently have in place in this area. So how about safety of CO2 pipelines? Well, when you look at the typical hazardous liquids pipelines that we have a jurisdiction over and compare it to incident rates against CO2 pipelines, CO2 pipelines have an incident rate in the last 20 years, according to this graph, and this is from data that we collect on our webpage, of about 1.08 incidents per 1,000 miles, and that's over the 20-year period, against the hazardous liquid lines, roughly 1.9 over that same period. There's only been one serious incident related to CO2 pipelines in the last 20 years, and that is, everybody's familiar with what happened in Satarsha, Mississippi. But I'd like to point out, look at the terrain around the Gulf Coast here. It's pretty flat, right? In Mississippi, they have a lot of land features that we don't have. And so after a period of several weeks of rain, there was a landslide that caused a fracture at a weld in that pipeline that caused that release. It caused roughly 45 to 50 folks to seek medical attention, and they had to evacuate an area of about 200 residents. But incidents like that inform PHMSA's actions going forward. So we take what happened there based on the investigation, and we figure out where we go from here. So what this has driven is we're now near the time we're about to issue we're about to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking in the fourth quarter of this year. It's on target to happen, and that rule will focus a lot on emergency preparedness and response, along with a few other things that will be there. So I'd like to ask my colleague, Ashley, I love to put her on the spot, but I want her to just mention a couple of the R&D grants that we're working on and some that have been issued very recently.
And I know we just have a minute.
Okay, I'll talk really fast. Thanks, Jay. I'm Ashley. I work in the Engineering and Research Division at PHMSA, and we have 4 active R&D projects that are looking at CO2 pipelines. The first one is with Texas A&M, and they're working on a fast model to determine how far CO2 is going to go if there's a pipeline rupture. We have another one that's looking at design and material requirements if you're going to repurpose an existing pipeline for CO2 service or if you're going to build a new pipeline. We have another one on leak detection that's also going to do all kinds of leak detection, but it's also going to include CO2. And then this last one we just awarded a couple weeks ago, and it says University of North Dakota up there, but they're actually partnering with Lamar University, which is right here in your backyard. And they're going to look at what kinds of CO2 we're going to get from the different sources, because it's not all clean, pure CO2. So that's a really exciting one that I'm looking forward to getting some results here. That one's going to wrap up in a year.
Thank you. Thanks very much. There are some QR codes that will be in the deck that's shared. I encourage you to please go to those QR codes and look at that information. Thanks very much.
Okay, and at this time, we'll take questions for any of our prior speakers, for Sharon or Jay.
Hi, Sharon. I have a question for you. So you mentioned that there's a public comment period during the permit process. What does that look like? Do you send letters out to people? Is it just on a website somewhere? What is that process?
Sure. So first of all, the public comment period it must be at least 30 days. And so we, because Texas is in Region 6 and EPA is primacy, not primacy, EPA has oversight over the UIC, the Class 6 program in Texas. So we reached out to the Region 6 office and we asked them, well, how do you notify the public? Your question exactly. And so what they said was they send it out in local newspapers, which is a requirement. They send out mailers and flyers to interested parties. It's posted on regulations.gov, and it's also posted to their Class 6 EPA website.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
You said that we're here today to talk about the Class 6 permits, and the one for Galveston County is the West Bay Storage Facility for, correct. I'm looking at, I just wanted to commend EPA for the new Class 6 permit information hub that they posted, where you can now access all of the application documents, which are heavily redacted. And so I'm looking at the West Bay application right now, and there's absolutely no information on well location. It's completely redacted. All of the area of review is completely redacted, and the modeling assumptions. So I'm just wondering how communities are supposed to come to this feeling confident and prepared and empowered with knowledge when everything that's essential about this project is secret information. I don't know if it's near my house. I don't know if it's near my community. And so what would you say to communities who want to know more about these projects?
Right, so the reason why a lot of it is redacted is that applicants can claim confidential business information, and so that information is redacted, and what we post to the website is what is publicly available. There is a Freedom of Information Act process, and I would direct you to go to it's called FOIA. You could go to the FOIA website to request additional information on the project.
I do have a follow-up question. I'm curious about whether or not EPA ever sort of challenges the classification of confidentiality in a particular application. Because I know I've been a reviewer for a lot of different proposals for government agencies, and I would say from my personal experience, sometimes I do see companies will say, this page contains confidential information, and I read it and I say, I don't see how this is related to anything that's business sensitive. So I'm curious if that ever gets challenged.
So there is a substantiation process. I'm not a FOIA person, so I'm not the expert on that, but certainly, yes, there's a substantiation process that can happen.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, yes. My question again is kind of trying to put what you're saying to what we see kind of happening right now. So I know you're saying with the Class 6 wells that there's a rigorous process to make sure that the characterizations of the site are strong geology, not dealing with earthquakes, seismically sound. But right now in Texas, our first Class 6 well permit is in Ector County. Ector County had a summer of over 71 earthquakes. That to me does not align with the things I just heard EPA demonstrate about the process being rigorous and safe. And then I've also heard EPA say that their permitted sites for the injection wells are the sites. There's no leakage. But right now in Decatur, Illinois, there's a leak that's happening in real time. And I hear you also say about the emergency response plans that once these things happen, there's protocol that are going to happen. But in Decatur, Illinois, the city council and the mayor did not find out that there was even 2 leaks until a news article came out. What am I supposed to say as a community advocate, right, as a community liaison? How am I supposed to go to community and reassure them that the EPA's got it? They say there's a rigorous process. Trust them, there's a rigorous process. What would you do if you're in my situation?
Sure, thank you. And let's start with your seismicity question. So each site is going to be specifically reviewed for that site. I can't speak specifically to Ector because I haven't, this is reviewed by Region 6. So I don't know the specifics of that site. But the site will be evaluated. It's the geology. Can it contain the CO2? Are there faults and fractures in the area? What is the seismic history of the area? So all that is evaluated by the permitting authority, and that goes into the decision. And so if the site is deemed unsuitable because of likelihood of seismicity, then the permitting authority would not permit at that site. And then regarding your second question, because the ADM is an ongoing enforcement action, I can't speak specifically to that question, but we can take a step back and look at the overall process of what would happen if a leakage occurs and who would be notified. So, there's ongoing testing and monitoring throughout the lifetime of the project to detect that leakage. There's reporting that is required that must be submitted to the EPA, to EPA or the permitting authority. And then if a leakage is detected and does occur, then there's that emergency and remedial response plan that you talked about. And that is specific to the site, specific to the location. There's local, all the folks who are local who need to be contacted, what actions should be taken in order to prevent the leakage from becoming an emergency situation. And so, yeah, that will be specific to the site.
As a follow-up, I'm curious, I'm sorry, if there was another question, please. Yeah. Okay, all right, I'll be quick. I'm wondering if observed seismicity changes in an area, can that be cause for an existing permit to be reviewed or changed?
Exactly, and there's a modification to the permit process. So if anything is deviating from that which was predicted in the application, then that will kick in the permit modification into place in order to ensure that the injection activity is safe.
Is it up to the applicant, though, to say, I've observed changes in seismicity, or is that something that EPA is looking
The
at?
permitting authority is reviewing the information. So they are the ones that are evaluating it, and site inspections are being conducted throughout the lifetime of the project. So yeah, it's the permitting authority.
Thank you.
Okay, so I know you keep mentioning the permitting authority, which for Class 6 wells right now is the EPA, but I know that the Texas Railroad Commission is seeking primacy, and that's really concerning to a lot of us who've been familiar with the Railroad Commission in the past. And so I guess I don't really even know how to frame my question, but like, for example, we have some facilities that right now are under review by Texas agencies, and they keep violating and violating and violating, and the EPA hasn't stepped in. And what we've been told is basically, because we've spoken to a lot of people at Region 6, and a lot of times the answer that we get is, it's the governor, or it's the agency, or we don't have authority. And so a lot of times, once the EPA doesn't have jurisdiction anymore, we're kind of like on our own here in Texas. And we've even been told by people in the federal government, well, nothing's gonna change in Texas until you guys elect different people. And so that's really disappointing because, again, we feel like we're being thrown into the wolves with certain situations, and not because we don't believe in the technology, or, I'm not a geologist, so I can't appeal that. But we are concerned about this issue of permitting authority. So like, how is the EPA factoring our concerns into the decision of whether or not to give them primacy?
Right, I hear your concern, and a couple of things. So Class 6 is very different than the other well classes, and a lot of the concerns that I'm hearing are coming from the other, EPA has direct implementation over Class 6 in Texas. And the risks associated with Class 6 are different than the risks associated for other well classes. And I would also mention that for primacy, the state, tribe, or territory must demonstrate that their regulations are at least as stringent as the federal requirements. And in addition, EPA has oversight over, for states that have primacy, EPA does have oversight over those programs and evaluates them to ensure that they are complying with UIC regulations, and that that their regulations are at least as stringent. And the review process for receiving primacy is also quite a rigorous review process. The state must demonstrate that they must submit a package to EPA that contains a program description that shows that they have the staff capable to do the work. They must demonstrate that the regulations are at least as stringent, and of course could be more stringent. So again, that's a lengthy review process.
Please.
Perfect. Hi, a couple quick follow-ups. For the primacy application, there's a public comment process if there's an application for primacy, correct?
Correct. A public comment period and a hearing, yeah.
Okay. And then to a previous question, Dominic's question, if there's a question about a certain well in a specific area, is the best point of contact to find out more information about the process someone at the regional office, or where would you direct people to if they want to know about a specific permit application?
Yes, so please reach out to EPA's regional office if EPA's has direct implementation. In addition, you can go to our Class 6 website. We have a tracker which tracks all the projects that EPA is currently reviewing, and you can filter that website by your state, by your region. We also have a Class 6 data repository which houses all sorts of permitting information, such as draft and final permits, as well as permit applications.
Okay. I'll acknowledge that we are about out of time for this segment, but some of the things that I'm hearing, I think it would be helpful to perhaps have some follow-up discussion with EPA around a couple of particular things. One, the criteria in primacy applications, like say there are 50 unaddressed community concerns, then maybe there's a way to formally take that into account when EPA is reviewing applications. Or if a community feels that their concerns are unaddressed, perhaps there's a mechanism to be able to get EPA to get back in and be involved in helping to resolve things. So those sound like things that might be useful to have a follow-up conversation about. Okay, let's thank our speakers again, and thank you all for the questions and the discussion. All right, so the next part of our conversation, we're going to shift gears just a bit. Okay, and we're going to talk about local emergency preparedness. Our next speaker is Joe Templeson, who is with the Emergency Management and Homeland Security right here in Texas City. So thank you.
All right, thanks, sir. Thank you. I'd just like to start by saying I appreciate your presentation with the analogy of spilling something on your shirt. I can definitely relate to that. I do that all the time. But this is I'm impressed. This is a great conversation. I love when the community gets involved and asks questions. That makes my heart happy. And I love to see all the government agencies here trying to do their best to relay that information. A lot of times there's just a disconnect. I think both sides have great intentions, and this is a perfect opportunity to come together. So my name is Joe Tomlinson. I'm the Emergency Manager and Homeland Security Director for the City of Texas City here. I've been doing this about 3 years, and prior to that, I was with the fire department here in Texas City for 26 years. In Texas City, we're a little bit unique. And just as how many people in the room are from Galveston County or live and reside here in Galveston County? Right, so a lot of people don't understand Texas City is a very prosperous, very large petrochemical industry town. And it has great benefits, not only for our community, but also for the nation and the global economy for what we produce here. But a lot of that stuff is extremely dangerous, and there's going to be incidents, and there have been quite a few incidents. And I just want to say, from listening to the conversation in the room, the incidents that occurred back in the 90s when I started working here were constant, and there were a lot of them. And I've seen personally over the years those incidents become less and less and less, just because of all these safety regulations and meetings like this where the community and stakeholders get together. So what we do in emergency management is my primary responsibility is to ensure the safety and security of the public. So we'll respond to any industrial or hazmat emergencies, weather-related incidents, hurricanes, floods, cold snaps. Hadn't had a tsunami yet, but I'm not ruling that one out, right? So active violence incidents, big mass shooters, stuff like that, and then medical emergencies like some kind of pandemics and stuff. We'd kind of be in charge of that. And the way emergency management does that is we have a lot of contacts. So I learned early on to be a good emergency manager, you have to have a ton of contacts in your phone. So we work closely with a bunch of different agencies. This was a oil spill we had back in December. This is our emergency operations center where we'll all get together. My job as emergency manager is to make sure all the right people are in the room and to make sure we're all working towards the same goal and the same objectives and the same outcomes, and everybody knows what everybody's doing and working on. In this room, there was EPA, TCEQ, Texas Railroad Commission, GLO, every alphabet, Coast Guard, every alphabet out there was responding to this call, and we worked extremely well together. So we'll work together on emergencies like that, and one of our primary, like I said, objectives is the safety and security of the public. And so we like to have many ways to get information out to the public. So we have social media, several different options there. We have a city website where we'll post stuff on during an emergency. We have a set of community sirens here. When our sirens go off here in Texas City, that indicates that we need you to shelter in place. And then other forms of communication, we have an Everbridge system where however you sign up for it, text, email, phone call, landline, or all of the above. When I send that message out, it means you need to take some kind of action, either evacuate or shelter in place. And right now we have over 64,000 contacts for that. Anybody can sign up for that program. You go to our website, click on notifications, and sign up for that. And then we also use the iPause system where we could take over cell phones in a geo-fenced area and communicate emergencies to the community like that. That's it. I can cut that short, and I'll be happy to answer any questions once we're done with the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, and next we're going to have Ashley Ross, who is an associate professor of marine and coastal environmental science at Texas A&M.
Ashley could not make it tonight, unfortunately.
Okay. So instead, we're going to jump right into Q&A. All right, no help. But also, Joe, thank you. I think that was the shortest presentation we've had so far, so that was quick. So
Trying to make up from time.
Yeah, lots of time for Q&A.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
About this emergency alert system that you have, because I think that's really important for our region. The iPause, you said to take over cell phones in the geofence. I did grow up in this area, and so I'm familiar with the few times that Texas City's blown up, even in my lifetime, which hasn't happened in a while, so congrats on that. But I think having, community notification system and like alarms for shelter in place is important, here, but CO2 is different, right? Sheltering in place is the wrong response to a CO2 emergency. You're gonna want to evacuate, right? And so that's gonna be like a different communication, that you're gonna have to work with communities. So I just wanted to bring that up, and maybe if you could touch on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that, and it all depends on the situation, right? If so, we've had, matter of fact, there's a leak going on in Deer Park right now. I think it just happened, H2S, right? There's a lot of times where people would assume evacuation is the right mode, but if you're in your car or if you're in your house and the whole area is consumed by, say, CO2, and to me, CO2 is it's easy to deal with compared to the stuff we have here. And say there's just a mass release of CO2 around your house, but we know within 20 minutes, it's going to have dissipated a great deal. The last thing we want you to do is try to evacuate, because you're going to go outside and then that has displaced the oxygen and you're going to be a victim. Versus staying in your house, shutting the window, shutting the AC, you're going to be fine, right? So there's times to evacuate for sure. A majority of the time, we prefer shelter in place because we don't want to put people out into that, whatever that atmosphere is, right? And we determine a lot of that through air monitoring. We have a lot of agencies that air monitor. We work close with Jason. He has, like I said, we try to know a lot of people. I have good contacts with CTEC, a national air monitoring company. They're stationed out of Kemah. They'll be here in 30 minutes. Every industry has a great group of people who have their own air monitors. We train with them. Galveston County Emergency Management has air monitors. Our air monitors we can set out in the public, and they can run for 80 hours, and they transmit that data into my EOC instantaneously. So a lot of decisions versus shelter versus evacuations, we make those dependent on the situation. If it's going to be a long-term incident, and we know it, we know ahead of time it's coming, or if it's a flammable gas, we're going to call for an evacuation because you can't hide from an explosion, right? So, but with CO2, we use that in fire extinguishers to put fires out, right? So, yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about any discussions or coordination you have with your department with pipeline operators?
Yeah.
And including exercises?
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking about how many 1.9 incidents per however many thousand miles. I think they all happened here in Texas City over many years. So I have a lot of experience with pipeline emergencies. One of our biggest challenges is trying to identify whose pipeline it is. Most of the incidents that I had with pipelines, it takes us, hours up to days before we could figure out who that belongs to. And I know there's apps like Buxus out there, and there's all type of Railroad Commission has a map of every pipeline until they don't. They're like, that's not on our map. There's abandoned pipelines that we deal with. So we take them on a case-by-case basis, and we respond to them using air monitors, using best practices, getting everybody involved, health district, county emergency management. We work closely with the state emergency management. EPA has been great to work with. Coast Guard's been great to work with. So if we need regulatory authority or somebody to say, hey, you need to get a contractor out here to clean this up or you're fixing to be fined, we call the Coast Guard or we call the EPA. I have contacts I can call right now. They'll pick up the phone, So there's all these different agencies have different purposes when it comes to emergency response, and we utilize them all. As far as training, we have annual training right here in the other room through, I forget the organization, represents all the pipelines. And they train here for first responders. But in Texas City, because of the area we're in, every single firefighter we have is hazmat tech trained. I'm trained in hazardous materials. I'm trained in incident command. And we use all that stuff while we're responding to pipeline emergencies or any type of hazmat emergency.
So let me, if I could, tag on to her question. What about actual tabletop exercises with operators?
So we do that from time to time. We have one planned for 2 weeks from now with all the industry, with the health district, and with the county, a tabletop, but it's more of a chemical release from a plant. We've done tabletops. We have the world's largest anhydrous ammonia storage tank. We've done tabletops and hands-on drills. Usually we do a tabletop and then a hands-on drill after that. All of our industries have fire departments, so we have a group called IMAS, Industrial Mutual Aid System, and we train with them. We meet every other month, and once a quarter we do some type of training. Kinder Morgan is on the schedule for maybe 2 weeks from now. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my hand, but they have a little facility kind of inside Marathon there, and we have a big level 3C drill where all the agencies respond to that drill, and that's in a couple weeks. So we try to train a lot. And that is helpful. It is helpful to train, but usually it's going to be some new incident or some new scenario or something that we have to adapt and overcome.
I know you use iPod. You mentioned Buxus. Do you guys use Buxus?
Man, I have the app, and I never use it. I think it's a good app for first responders who aren't hazmat trained, right? And I don't have a big use for it because I get there usually after the leaks occurred. We've had a leak, 250,000 gallons of gasoline from a pipeline that was going into the bay. And our biggest concern is evacuating the neighborhood, trying to boom that before it's an environmental hazard. The oil leak that I just showed you on there, that was over 500 barrels of oil going through a drainage ditch through 4 neighborhoods, and we stopped it right before it got to Moses Lake. There's a railroad version of that called Ask Rail that's extremely effective. You click the number on the train and it tells you every single thing that's in that car and in the train, and it connects you to a lot of different apps that can help plume models and stuff like that. So I think Buxus is good for certain areas, but I haven't used it much. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
We want to get to a microphone, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So everybody can hear your question.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can hear you. All right, so incident command. So I take FEMA classes on incident command and stuff like that. So your Homeland Security, do y'all have your own protocols? So say whenever there is an incident, say at one of the local companies, are you always the one that does head command over fire department, the different agencies? Are you the top of the line?
No, that's a great question. Incident command is my passion. I've seen it kind of develop from its infancy, and now it's nationwide. And no matter, and this is thanks to the federal government. They made everybody get on the same page. If you want federal funding, you got to do incident response this way. And it's a great program. And I'm not always at the top. A lot of times, most of the time, we set up a big incident. So we use incident command anytime more than 2 trucks go to a call. So it could be a wreck, and we're using incident command. And it just depends on who's in charge of that area. But if it's a big event, our incident command, we like to have the responsible party part of it, called a unified command, responsible party, and then stakeholders. This oil spill was me, the EPA federal on-scene coordinator, and the responsible party and the Railroad Commission. It was 4 of us making decisions and setting goals, but it was done with input from every single stakeholder from those meetings that we'd had twice a day or once a day. We determined what was best for everybody, fish and game, county, everybody that was involved got to meet and talk about what their concerns were, and then we made a plan and everybody was on the same page every day. And we used the same language because of that incident command. It's a great system.
Does Homeland Security have their own trainings and systems like FEMA has set up in their government, like that part, or no?
As far as incident command, everybody is on the same exact system, and that's what makes it work so well.
That is really great.
Yeah, so somebody can respond, and we do, there's a lot of Texas firefighters in TIFMAS that'll respond to California and to fight a forest fire, and everybody uses the same terminology. Everybody has the same span of control, no more than 3 to 7, and then you branch off. And incident command, you could just grow it as big as you want, to where you have 70 different agencies inside this one incident command system, or it can be 2 trucks, and it works well. You can expand it and collapse it as you need to. So it's a great system, and we really like it. Use it a lot here.
I believe we had one more question. Okay, and I think we just have time for one more question.
My question is kind of regarding the cumulative impact of not only dealing with carbon risk, but all the other risks that you already deal with, right? But then the additional cumulative impact of natural disasters, right? We just had a hurricane that took out power for a really long time. And I don't think we talk enough about the residual impacts of losing power, especially in these facilities that then have to burn out so many emissions because they don't have power. And then when power does come back on, it goes towards industry first and community sort of has to wait. As it pertains to this region in particular, and just the reality, right? We just had a hurricane that's like pushing a new storm level category of hurricane, right? And we just have a chemical explosion that's still happening in Georgia from the hurricane before that. How do we go about taking a more proactive approach to safety versus reactive? We talked about the incident that happened in Mississippi, and we talk about all the things that we did from like learning experience. But is there a way that we can talk about, fire alarms, smoke detectors before the building burns down, right? Is there a way that we can be more proactive, and especially when it comes to natural disasters?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And all that is job security for me, so I don't hate it. But I'll tell you, there's a lot that goes into that here in Texas City, because of the industry that we have. The city's built around that and thrives on that. So we put in place, the mayor and the commissioners over the years, going back, we put in place, I think, a great system. So we just had a new facility move into our town, built a big plant, and it was a great benefit to not only our community, but for the national economy. It does great things, but it has a lot of hazards to it. But as they came in, they were meeting with my office and with the fire department. We had regular meetings as to what they wanted to do, and we would tell them what we needed, what we wanted them to do to help make this community safe, right? So, and then when they started breaking ground, we were there. When they started building, we were there. All the way up to now, we have great communications, and I have great communications with every single plant manager, every single fire chief in the plant and in the area. And one great example is they were coming in with ammonia was going to be their big product, and I said, we have a lot of air monitors, but we can't monitor for ammonia. And they said, here you go. Here's everything you need to monitor for ammonia. And they upgraded our whole air monitoring system. And I think communication between the industry that's coming in or the new technology that's coming in, having a great communication with the community back and forth. So stuff will go wrong. And when it does, you want to have already been prepared for that. And I think that's the best we can do. And with natural disasters, we try to prepare for them and harden and do mitigation products to limit the damage that is going to be caused by those natural disasters, right? Yes, sir.
So it sounds like you're saying that there's going to be damage that we can't ever prevent it, right? All we can do is kind of mitigate it. And I'm here in the previous answers, so like stakeholders that come together to deal with the ramifications after. How much do community members get paid when they have to deal with these expected sort of leaks and explosions and pollutions? Do they get compensation, or do they have a seat at the stakeholder table in those meetings?
Who?
like community members, right? If it blew up in my backyard and I dealt with the health impacts of it, right? And you all had an emergency response team with the fish and wildlife, with the water, and you all be like, okay, we charge the industry this much money, so you guys will get a slice of the pie. You guys will get a slice of the pie.
Right, and that's
it
not
does
my
the community.
Yeah, and that's not my field. My field is when something goes wrong and it's bad, that's where I come in. And as soon as we get that mitigated to where the community's safe again, that's when EPA, Coast Guard, all those regulated, in lawsuits and lawyers, right? That's kind of where that comes in. I'm not part of that.
That's fair. And so I guess then understanding that there's that gap, right, and that that's not necessarily your job. What better ways can we sort of put forth to make sure that community gets compensated for these disasters that we are talking about that are gonna happen, right? Because a lot of times their public health and their short-term and long-term impacts are sort of overlooked when it comes to how we respond to these sort of disasters.
Right, and again, I can't speak to that. I know there's avenues of lawsuits and stuff like that goes on to where people are trying to make whole again. And I think depending on the responsible party, sometimes I've dealt with responsible parties that were just overboard in making sure everybody was made whole again. And then I've heard of responsible parties that just go out of business and leave everybody hanging. So I think when a industry's coming into your community, I think those conversations happen then, and it just helps with preparedness and resiliency, right? So.
All right, let's say thanks again to our speaker and for all of the questions as well. Okay, thanks. So the next portion of our agenda is going to focus on DOE's role, how projects are selected and advanced. We have two different speakers in this particular segment of our agenda. The first is going to be Gillian Rosen with the DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. And Gilly has a background in geology and climate science, and we look forward to your remarks. Thanks for being with us. Also, there we go, slide advancer right here. I'm gonna give you this mic.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Gilly Rosen. I work at DOE headquarters, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about carbon safe and CO2 transport studies that we have going on in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a geologist. If you came by the booth before, we got to do some nerdy stuff, looking at how CO2 is stored in porous medium. Basically, I became a geologist because I love being outside. I'm a swimmer and a hiker, and I notice when I'm swimming, there's all this sand and sediment, and somehow that turns into rocks. So I spent many, many, many years studying it and doing research on how sediment gets dispersed in the ocean, and what you can learn about past climate by looking at the rock record. And we heard some presentations by Sue earlier, and how, now I'm concerned about forward-looking climate, right? So that to me, I moved to Texas a week before Hurricane Ike. And I see the damage that happens in these communities, and it's got me really worried. I spent weeks and weeks gutting strangers' houses after Hurricane Harvey, right? So I understand the vulnerability in the communities. So I'm looking for ways to mitigate climate. And for me, CO2 storage, especially in geologic storage, was a good way to get there. So you've seen this slide before. Earlier we were talking about point source capture. Now we're going to talk about permanent storage. And just to circle back a little bit, there was a question on conversion before. Conversion is really interesting. We'd love to make durable products out of CO2, but the research so far has been largely on permanent storage. So we're much farther along in that process than we are. We're still looking into that research, but it's a much earlier state. So we've done 20 years of research and geologic storage just at DOE. Prior to that, oil field, they've been injecting CO2 for 50 years, okay? And that was for enhanced oil recovery. But now just for geologic storage in non-oil systems at DOE, we've been starting at the basic science, moved into pilots and demonstrations and large-scale projects. And now we're looking at carbon safe. That started in 2016. And what carbon safe does, that stands for Storage Assurance Facility Enterprise. Government loves acronyms, okay? But carbon safe is a regional approach. We're looking at de-risking the geology, understanding what goes into the geologic storage for multiple types of geology. Okay, and this is a phased approach, but first I want to talk to you about why the Gulf Coast is a great area to do that. We start off with existing CO2 pipelines. We've got some infrastructure here already, okay? We know that's been handled throughout this region so far, but we're looking at other transport options. We've got FEED studies, front-end engineering and design, and here in the blue dashed lines you can see we're studying the possibility of future pipeline transport. And now what that means is it's a paper study. There's no construction involved, but we're looking for future solutions. And in purple, off towards Louisiana, you can see another study, and that's for looking at how we can handle CO2 transport on ships. Okay, so those are the two transport studies we're looking at in my team. And then the triangles are carbon safe projects. And we'll talk about carbon safe a little more because that's where the geology fund comes in.
Okay. 2 minutes.
We start at site screening. We look at large scale areas. Again, that's why the Gulf Coast is so good. We go down to site selection. The more data we get, we refine where we're going to go put these projects. And then we get these sites ready for permitting. And we do that through 4 phases. Phase 1, pre-feasibility. Can you put a team together? Do you have the right experts involved? Phase 2 is a storage complex feasibility. Typically takes 1.5 to 2 years. You start looking at the geologic data you have access to. Are there wells you can look to? Gulf Coast, lots of wells, lots of pre-existing geologic data. And then for phase 3, we're really doing that detailed site characterization. During this phase, you can acquire more data, you can drill another well and understand the geology that's, right within your area, and we assemble all that geologic data, build 3D models of the subsurface, and we do dynamic simulations. How would CO2 behave in this situation? And all of these steps feed into the requirements for the Class 6 permit. So this is the phase where you collect your data, you do all of your really rigorous analysis and prepare your permits. Phase 4 is construction. So once you get your permit, that's when construction begins. And then there's different phases of EPA's permit. You get your authority to construct, and that comes before you ever get to inject. So there's additional considerations that go in between construction and injection. One last thing I want to bring up is the NEPA process. Okay, so this is essentially, it's a process of environmental assessments, and during which there's plenty of opportunity for public comment. And anytime the federal government does something, we have to understand the environmental impacts. If you're just doing a paper study, chances are there's not going to be a lot of environmental impacts. The more field work you do, the more environmental assessments need to take place. So I'm not a NEPA expert, but this is part of the process for you to get any sort of federal funding. So without a NEPA process, we don't move forward. And I think I'll leave it at that to keep us on time and hand it over to our next speaker.
Great. Okay, now we're going to hear from John Brown, who is with the UE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations.
Good evening. Thanks for being here with us. I'm John Brown. I work at the Department of Energy Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. I'm here to talk about some of the large-scale carbon capture projects we have that have been selected in the region. And I want to, emphasize that these are ideas. They're probably anywhere from 5 to 10 years away from reaching an operational stage. And so we are bringing you on at the ground floor so that we can start providing community input into these projects. I like to consider myself a community connector. I'm from Denver. I love mountain biking, chasing my dog in the mountains, and I've now picked up pickleball. So I don't know if anyone else here wants to play later. I love picking up games when I go out of town. I've been privileged to work in a lot of different industries, agriculture, gas and electric utilities, water infrastructure, mining, telecommunications. I've done this work globally, so it's given me a broad perspective of what it takes to get community projects of large scale going, and it really does need to involve the community. At OCID, we were created through Congress, 2 bills, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We were allocated $25 billion to help advance the U.S. energy system. if you think about it, we've really been running our energy system here in the United States with the same technology for over 100 years, and that includes our oil and gas industry and our electric grid. In the last 25 years, we've bolted on, literally, wind and solar, but we've done that on in a 100-year system. So really to advance us to the next wave of energy and our needs, including artificial intelligence. I hope some of you are following this trend, but we're going to need more electricity demand than we've experienced during the Industrial Revolution to power the data centers that will run AI. So how do we do that while we're also trying to decarbonize our economy? And so our strategy is very multifaceted. We want to, tackle, if you see a lot of different technologies, it's going to be based on region, need, resourcing. But today we're going to focus on carbon management and industrial processes because that is a focal point for this region. Again, I'm in the carbon management area, and so we have three main buckets. In our demonstration category, these are large-scale projects. As you heard before, that means that these are technologies that are ready to be deployed at a larger scale. They've gone through probably 10 to 15 years of research and development and smaller testing. So that means they have a technical readiness level of 8 and above. And another important number that we look at is the adoption readiness level. And that's important because we have selected projects that we hope can be replicated and deployed at other areas in the world. We also, we see this as an opportunity for America to be the innovator. As you know, we're not the greatest polluter in the world. So there are hundreds of coal plants in China and India and elsewhere that need to decarbonize. So we think if we test, demonstrate, deploy this technology here, not only do we benefit because every local community who gets these projects, we're going to be improving local air quality. Now we can be innovators and export this technology around the world.
1 minute.
So we have over 100 projects in all these other categories that we've talked about. You can go to our website and we'll send you this, but there's an interactive map where you can learn more about all these different projects. As of September 30th, of the 100 projects, 50 of them have reached award, which means they're in early stage development. Here in the Gulf Coast, we have a number of active projects. I'm going to quickly highlight some that are just close. This is the Baytown Carbon Capture Project. This is a gas-powered power plant, and they're looking to capture 2 million metric tons. They just reached their first award amount in phase 1, which was about $12.5 million to do their technical assessment, the FEED study that you heard. It's a paper study to evaluate the project. Another one, and this one is under negotiations, is ExxonMobil. They're looking to see if they can convert an existing facility to be powered by hydrogen. This would give them a reduction of about 2.5 million metric tons. It's in, like I said, in negotiations, and so it's kind of uncertain when it may or may not go to award. A third one that did reach award status is a BASF chemical manufacturing. Again, they want to use carbon capture technology to decarbonize their manufacturing process. They think they can reduce their carbon by about 75% using this technology. I want to stress, we understand the community needs a lot of stage gates to be able to evaluate a project, and we also want to make sure that, as Ed said, we can be good stewards of federal taxpayer money. So we have a very detailed phased approach, the way that we manage these projects. So the projects we're talking about today that have just entered phase 1 or nearing phase 1 are somewhere between 5 to 10 years away from where they will be constructed and go into operation. So that gives the community a lot of opportunity to learn about these projects, to help inform how they'll be designed. And each project is, the project award recipients are responsible for developing those community outreach plans and tailoring them to the needs and wants of the communities they serve. So.
I know our time is tight, so we'll have to answer any additional questions.
Okay, so and so you'll hear from the next presenter how all these projects do have community benefit plans attached to them.
Awesome, great. So at this time, if we have any questions for John or from Gilly, please. Okay, we do have a question in the back.
My question is for you, for the DOE, regarding the same sort of current leaks that we have in Decatur, Illinois. What is your response to that process? Is it displaying that there is a need to reevaluate the process of permitting because we're already experiencing a leak? How do you read that information?
So I want to clarify a little bit what you mean by leak. So what's been happening in Illinois is that some fluids have been, so CO2 is not coming out at the surface, and it's not making it out to groundwater. What has happened is that there's been a little bit of movement of some of the reservoir fluid 5,000 feet below the surface just to another reservoir. Okay, so now that moves. Technically, that's a leak in the sense that it is not exactly where it was expected or where it was hoped to be, okay? But it has not gotten into the environment, and it is still, it's basically the monitoring program that detected that movement. So you could argue that the monitoring system is doing its job because we know that things are moving, and as we typically develop these monitoring programs, we can now learn how to develop them next time, right? So, and it's, from a scientific point of view, it's working. Does that make sense? Not necessarily. We don't have the full diagnostics yet. It's the CO2 was not detected in those fluids.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so from a scientist perspective too, I studied environmental science in University of Texas, El Paso. How can we claim with surety then that the permitting process is going to prevent technical leaks or plume movement, right? It seems like maybe we should be a little bit more tepid with our language to say that, we have considerations that can incline us to say that this will potentially be safe, but we don't know for sure until we apply this at scale, until we really understand the implications, because we don't know what we don't know as scientists, right?
So yes, definitely following that line of what don't we know, DOE is actively working on looking into the metallurgy of how CO2 and the brines interact with the wellbore material. So that's active research that's going on now. I have a list of publications I can give to you, but that's actually started 15 years ago.
25.
Well,
20 years ago, I did it personally down the road.
Nice.
The publications I have that I can offer to you are detailed geochemical interactions, metallurgy. I mean, we're looking into how it interacts with cement, how it interacts with different metals, and how the fluids interact. And I think that's a really interesting question.
Absolutely.
Because in Illinois specifically, the brines that we're looking at are unique. And so what we would like to do is look across the country at all the different types of brines and study how each one of them will interact with the metals with this. And so this is an ongoing area of really cool research we could talk about.
Exactly. Well, then to that point, I feel like we need to be really careful about sort of saying definitively things will be safe or things can, because like you said, we just don't know, and each site is so specific and so different, and it requires, I would say it requires even more than 10 to 25 years of research, right, to say with a definitive sort of sense of assurity that these things will not leak, right? These things will not happen. I really appreciate the research, and we have to continue that. But I think until we have, decades and decades of...
But we do have decades and decades. I mean, if you look at 2
decades. Yeah.
No, actually 50 years of CO2 injection.
And including the metallurgic research with how it interacts with the ground?
Well, there had been no, yes. I mean, yeah, essentially yes. And the lack of incidents over those 50 years right? It kind of gives you a best practice or a history of practice. And so we've been very successful in CO2 injection, and we've just now are using it for storage explicitly instead of for EOR.
Yes, but and then also into that context, what we're testing is permanent storage, right? 25 years, 30 years, however long it's been, how can we fully claim that the permanence of these storage is going to happen, you know? But yeah.
Sure.
Well,
I mean, there's some fundamental science we can discuss offline. I'd be happy to have a chat with you later.
Thanks. So I had a follow up to that, but I have a question actually for the DOE guy about to the point about I'm sorry, John. Paige. I'm Paige. My name is Paige Powell with Commission Shift.
Day 3.
Day 3. 3 days, and my questions are getting better and better. So here we go. To you, I wanted to say, you know, CO2 I'm concerned about the transport and sequestration of, but more than that, I'm concerned about hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol in the chemical refining corridor and the impacts of bringing more natural gas and more volatile material into an already very dense region, and what that could do to increase the possibility of a chain reaction chemical explosion event. And if y'all are modeling that at the DOE, because that's my biggest fear. We've always been afraid of what happens when a big storm comes through and blows up the ship channel, but it's going to be a bigger boom with hydrogen. So could you speak to that? And then I do have some evidence about CO2 corrosion in Class 2 injection wells, failing mechanical integrity tests, and having extreme violations at the Railroad Commission. We just sent a letter to EPA about EIP's recent investigation into that. So I can send you that data if you'd like, but most of my question was for you about hydrogen.
No, those are excellent.
Thank you.
Am I on? Yep.
You are on.
Those are excellent questions. And what I can say is that the way that our projects are designed, the early stage will be doing those technical, safety, and environmental assessments. So it's prudent for these companies to spend millions of dollars to make sure that it's the right thing to do to spend billions of dollars. And public safety will be a component of their work. And they will be working in collaboration with some of the folks that you heard today about evaluating what would it mean to bring those new facilities into this ecosystem. And obviously, as you've heard from the other experts, there's a lot of expertise in this community that will be involved in that. So, and that's why it's a staged approach, and our phased approach that I showed you on that graph is that at every milestone, we will evaluate whether a project is, it's prudent to go forward. And if there's safety or environmental concerns, that is a reason that the project could be stopped, and we would discontinue DOE funding if we felt like it wasn't the right thing to do for the community.
Okay, I believe we'll take one more quick question. We are running a bit behind, but please.
Hello, Cecilia Flores, consultant, reservoir engineer, and thank you, Gilly, for such a great presentation of 2 minutes. Yeah, basically we have experience on this in the oil industry for so many years, and we have, I think we have enough experience and training about how to safely secure that CO2 on the ground. So my question will be more related to having and using that experience. I know we are merging with oil and gas to have all this experience bring to this new area of concern. So my question will be, like, in terms of regulations, is there a specific about how can you demonstrate what are the facts that the government needs to say, okay, this pilot can be now executed as a field project in order to secure or safely inject CO2 and remain in that particular layer that we want to have it, right? because that's the main purpose.
Yeah, so as a reservoir engineer, you know the importance of dynamic simulation, right? So a reservoir model, a simulated model, is required in the permitting process. So that's how you delineate your area of review, which is the area that gets permitted. Okay, so again, static modeling, dynamic modeling, everything is very similar, and then that's just part of the built-in process. And so once you define your area of review, that's the area that you then need to look for your legacy wells, right? All of that is contained within your defined area.
And for the pilots, how many years do you need to demonstrate that the pilot is working right? The pilot site that you pick.
Sure. So I think maybe we're using the phrase pilot differently. So once you have your permit to inject, there's periodic monitoring and a review period. And maybe Sue can speak to this a little bit more. I think Emma's behind you with the mic.
I'm sorry. We'll have to address that perhaps
we can
next
chat
few-
after.
Yes. Yep. So we'll have time after the formal agenda ends. We want to reserve that time for conversations like this to be able to continue. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let's thank our speakers again, and thanks for everybody for the questions. All right. So next we're going to hear from Kelly Romer from DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. We'll be talking about community benefits.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to do an abbreviated version tonight, but make sure that you know that the slides are shared. My name is Kelly Romer. I'm a social scientist on the domestic engagement team in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. I'm here to set the stage about the next conversation around community benefits tied to DOE-funded projects. So first, I just want to start out by clarifying two terms that might come up tonight that are related but describe two different tools for delivering community benefits related to DOE-funded projects. So first, we talk about community benefit plans. Both John and Gilly mentioned these are part of all DOE-funded carbon management projects, and these are specific to DOE projects. So what these community benefit plans are is they're descriptions of how a project will engage with community and labor stakeholders and address the 4 community benefit plan priority areas. Formal community and workforce agreements, like community benefit agreements, these are negotiated legal agreements between a project developer and a community group or coalition or a labor group that often outline the roles, responsibilities, or identify mechanisms for delivering community benefits that are legally binding and enforceable. So we can dig into these a little bit more. So community benefit plans are a set of plans that are seeking to address the social impacts as well as deliver benefits to communities that host DOE-funded projects. So these plans, as John described, are submitted alongside the technical elements of a project's application. They're reviewed by both internal and external experts with subject matter expertise in the areas such as environmental justice, workforce development, diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental justice. So these plans represent up to 20% of a total application score. So this means that the quality of these plans is really important to funding decisions. These plans are monitored throughout the project duration and are posted publicly once they are awarded. So what's included in these community benefit plans? I said they need to address those 4 priority areas, which describe how they're going to conduct early and robust community and labor engagement, create high quality jobs and invest in workforce development, advance diverse and equitable participation in employment and other economic opportunities, and implement the Justice 40 initiative to ensure that project benefits are directed to disadvantaged communities and that impacts are mitigated. So what I just want to emphasize with some of these projects that are in those R&D phases that are feasibility, site characterization, they don't have those construction components quite yet in the process. And so what is in those community benefit plans are the plans and strategies to conduct the research and analysis necessary to better understand the local community, workforce needs, environmental justice assessments. They are conducting early engagement and creating partnerships to identify mutual goals and needs. They are establishing what we call two-way engagement mechanisms. So what are the formal processes that each project will be taking to solicit, collect, public input, and how are they going to integrate that into the project design and implementation process? And finally, we want to see how they're developing plans to develop those project-specific agreements.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Gotcha. Something that I just want to touch on is the Justice 40 initiative. Conversations around cumulative impact and burden have come up over the last few days, and I want to just mention that because of the Justice 40 initiative, this is an explicit part of the site characterization process and part of the community benefit plan, where all impacted communities are identified to understand the existing burdens in these communities, as well as what potential benefits that would support environmental and energy justice, as well as how those benefits will flow to those specific communities. Finally, I just want to end by speaking to those formal legal agreements, community and workforce agreements. There's multiple types that meet specific needs. And while they're not requirements of DOE-funded projects, they are strongly encouraged and considered the gold standard of community benefit plans, because we want to see those commitments outlined, formalized into agreements that will last beyond DOE's role in the project area. And I just want to share an example of a recent carbon management project that is not DOE funded but has an established community benefit agreement. This is a pipeline in Nebraska. And there are 3 priority areas for this agreement, speaking to landowner protections, public safety, as well as community investment opportunities. This agreement is published online. I recommend people check out the QR code, read it, really get a sense of how that came to be. I think one of the important things to take away is that in addition to identifying benefits and sort of terms of engagement, it outlines a process for conflict resolution, or what happens if something does happen, and how will that be enforced. So with that, I'd like to just open it up for questions. There's some resources and initiatives that if they come up, we can speak to those more. But how is my time?
Excellent,
Okay.
excellent. Great, thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, so I believe we're going to move to the community benefits panel.
Okay.
And then we can take questions in aggregate. There's a Q&A that'll come as a part of the panel. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, so thank you, Kelly, for getting us started with our community benefits discussion. And next, I'm going to invite Sonrisa Lucera from DOE's Office of Energy Justice and Equity, who will be leading our community benefits panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we live?
Now we're live. How's it going, everybody? All right, we got some whoos tonight. All right, we're a little more live. That's great. So I'm Sonrisa Lucero. I'm with our Office of Energy Justice and Equity at the Department of Energy, and have been working down here in Texas and Louisiana for the last 2.5 years. Focused a lot on carbon management and hydrogen, but my role is really around community engagement and stakeholder engagement And so I'm really excited to be with our panel tonight, to talk about the benefits and the community side, the community engagement side of DOE's work. And so I'm excited to introduce our panel, and I might actually let them say a little bit about themselves as well. And so I'll go ahead and start with Randy here next to me, and if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to see everybody tonight. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Randy Harris. I'm an international representative with the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA. We represent 540,000 or so members in the United States and Canada. Large presence here in Texas and the Gulf Coast. We construct any number of projects from roads and bridges to pipelines to green energy to wind and solar. So it's exciting to be here tonight to talk about this next venture.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Edwards. I am the Economic Development Director with the City of Texas City. I want to thank all of y'all for taking your time to be here tonight, including from subject matter experts to engaged citizens. It's really incredible to see this group taking these projects so seriously as we continue to move forward in our industrial complex and see it become more and more a part of our daily lives. In my history with municipal government, I've been doing this for about 17 years. I've worked in 2 high industrial areas, including Deer Park, Texas, and now Texas City. And we know firsthand, especially having served as, public information officer for the EOC or what have you, community engagement is so critical, not just before, during, and after incidents, but when new companies arrive so the community can really understand how they can be benefited and how it's best for the community itself.
Great. And Dominic.
Hello there, my name is Dominic Chacon. I'm the Houston Regional Coordinator with an organization called Texas Campaign for the Environment. And we are an organization that is set, our mission is to stop the expansion of oil and gas industry here in Texas. And I know some people already kind of tensed up just by that statement, but I want to be clear. We are not advocating for the end of oil and gas. We are actually advocating for the opposite, right? We need to preserve this resource for future use, that they can rely on it. We believe those who are advocating for the continuous expansion and drilling and more carbon in the atmosphere are the ones actually bringing about an end to oil and gas. So I just want to say that so that we can have, radical transparency and honesty, so you all can know where I'm coming from and we can have a good faith conversation, right? When it comes to community engagement, I want to make it clear, we are a statewide organization, but we do not speak on behalf of community. We are here to simply try to elevate the concerns. We have a bit of an expertise in carbon management, in hydrogen, petrochemicals, but not every community member has that. And so while we're here representing community, I want to make it clear that our presence here does not equate to consent, that the community is not buying into it just because we are here.
Thank you so much. The community benefit plans, as we just heard from our previous speaker, has really been intended, it's DOE's mechanism to really advance 4 major elements within the projects. And so, folks here are probably familiar with like an RFP, right? Request for proposal, like how you apply for funding, right? That is that is what we've been talking about in a way tonight. DOE, our version of that is a FOA, or funding and opportunity announcement. And so really what we're doing is we have all this money and we're trying to look for people to help us spend it. But they're partners with us, right? So they're coming with their own money as well, and we're kind of matching that. So our main mechanism to kind of get some of those values and aspects about high quality jobs, Justice 40 benefits out to underrepresented and underserved communities, and expanding the diversity of the participants in these projects. Really, we can only push that through what we put in our version of an RFP. And that is in our request for these community benefit plans. And so some of those values that we've been highlighting, the 4 areas are protection of communities, the flow of benefits out to them, the description of how that's going to happen, how you're going to engage with communities over time, and then how can we move the accountability for those benefits actually being achieved away from only just DOE being able to pull back the money that we're investing, but also to have like a legal agreement between the communities or the workforce and the company directly, and kind of pull DOE out of in the middle, or only being DOE in the middle as the only mediator. So those are some of the things that or in that community benefit plan. And I kind of want to dig in with each of you on your thoughts about this. And so I think the first place maybe to start is some of our protections for communities and how we can make sure that some of the unintended consequences of these projects come out into the world. So, whoever wants to jump in first, either from like a worker safety standpoint or from local community protections or some of the other concerns that I know have been arisen around carbon management. Anyone want to kind of jump in and share your thoughts about community benefit plans and risks?
I think, and I'll, if there's no objection, I'll just start with, I think your point about the unintended consequences. I think that's an excellent place to kind of think about these types of projects and these types of frankly, investment. Because what happens is everybody sees the big new shiny thing, and everybody wants to chase the big new shiny thing. But what we don't oftentimes think about is, okay, what's left after the new big shiny thing isn't so shiny anymore? Just from a build standpoint, and I don't want to get into the long-term operations, but when you construct a project such as one of these types of things, and you invest literally, say, $3 billion in something, 36 to 40 month build time, you have to be smart about and think about on the front end what that looks like to a community. Because what you don't want to have happen is in a community, you want the people working on that project to, one, be from that community if at all possible, but also to look like that community looks. And that's in age, race, color, creed, and all those things that matter. When you don't do that, and when you're not thinking about those things, you end up with a significant number of folks who are not from that area, who don't care about that area, and are just there to pick up the paycheck. Instead of going there and saying, okay, I'm going to raise my family here, I'm going to do this the right way. I think those unintended consequences, so if you don't think about those things on the front end, and think about, okay, from a construction workforce standpoint, what do we want that to look like? How do we deal with that? Because those benefits from the construction should also stay in the community, should also flow downhill and stick around and flow downhill and back uphill. Because then they're buying homes, they're coaching Little League, they're the dance instructors, they're the PTA presidents. Those are the kinds of things you want to see in these communities, at least from a construction standpoint.
So when we spoke beforehand, we kind of talked about a way to take steps to, if not ensure it, then at least work with the community that shows up, right? So we talked about an informational program that we had in this very room for a liquefied natural gas plant that's planning to come to Texas City. And what they did was they came armed with not only their leadership, but also people that could speak to possible employment opportunities, as well as third-party environmental consultants to speak to a net positive environmental response to the project as a whole. We publicized it very heavily. We had a fantastic turnout. We had about 150 people in this room. And what that accomplishes is it's showing that you have the project, and of course they have their own private interests, but then you have an environmental third party that has their own interests and standards to meet. And then you bring it home to the residents themselves to show them this has a potential direct impact for you. We have 50 to 100 jobs just at this project. We deal with the projects that have 500 to 700 jobs. So outside of the obvious benefit of that employment and giving those families that stability, we also think in terms of the property tax and or the sales tax that's going to come along with some of these. So property tax, even if they don't buy the land, even if they're still leasing, they are paying tax on the improvements that they make, and that goes back to support the whole community. Sales tax is also a huge factor to consider, because whether it's the contractors that are coming in to construct that facility or the employees that are now making Texas City their home, or hopefully they live here already, that's gas every day, that's food every day, that's spending money in local stores, and that strengthens the community as a whole as well. So one of my jobs in economic development is to make sure that the community understands that when we assess a project for its true safety, and when we go through all of the steps necessary to do the construction properly, clear the space, and they open, it's going to have a massively positive impact on the community. Joe and his team, as well as our communications team, are there to provide support when, unfortunately, sometimes the opposite happens. They do a great job communicating, not just around incidents, but throughout the year about ways to stay informed, how to shelter in place, how to build survival kits, et cetera. So it's something that we take a lot of responsibility for, and it's definitely a 365-day-a-year job.
I want to validate the very important arguments that were just made, but I have to be the counter person to kind of expose how those things are not necessarily true. So for financial viability, right, we need to recontext the situation to make it be known really full-throatedly that these projects would not exist financially without public dollars going into it, right? So this is not private industry investing all of its own money into these projects. These are publicly funded projects. And as we're seeing, the public doesn't always have information to where the location of these sites are, what the full risks are. So how can we have a real conversation about protecting from these risks if we don't know the risks, right? So they're not always bringing money. And to your point about the property taxes, I wish that were true, but in my organization, we conduct studies in counties throughout Texas to explore how public dollars are going to private oil and gas and petrochemical industries via school district tax codes, city tax codes, and county and colleges. And what the studies show is that they're foregoing their property taxes. In the study we did in Corpus Christi, we found that over $2.6 billion of property taxes that would have come through the school district and the county and the city were foregone because they entered special agreements with these industries. We found the same thing for Brazoria County, $2.1 billion, and we're just finishing our study for Harris County, and I can't release the numbers yet, but it's also showing how the school districts all along the ship channel and in this region are giving away millions of dollars that would otherwise be going to these school districts. So the idea that they're going to be bringing in property taxes isn't necessarily true because they're entering these agreements. Yeah, that's what I would say.
There's so much to unpack there, and I
Yeah.
kind of just want to start at the beginning and go
Yeah.
forward. So one project we're working with right now has an estimated CapEx, which is capital expenditure, of between $1 and $3 billion. The city, in terms of incentives that we offer, where you're talking about property tax abatements, et cetera, our property tax abatement policy is the first few years, yeah, you don't have to pay property tax. Now, during that first few years, you're probably not going to have very much property to expand on that land. So it doesn't end up in as much of a yield as it could. That strictly goes down from there to where the next 3 years we only let them reimburse 50, and the last 4 years we let them reimburse 25%.
Are you talking about oil and gas companies specifically?
Yes,
Or,
anyone that we would have a chapter 312 or a 380 with, we can either do property tax rebates, or we can do pilots, which is a payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is if you math it, it doesn't really matter if you do a tax reimbursement plan or a pilot, it kind of all averages out. But in terms of public money invested in these projects, that's not a thing. The company comes in, they purchase the property, they spend the money to develop that property. The only involvement that the city has is the incentive there at the very beginning.
Yeah, let me offer a little clarification that these carbon capture projects are on the federal level receiving public dollars, and on the local level they receive public dollars via these tax abatements, right? And kind of to push back a little bit against that idea of them bringing economic balancing, right? It balanced out the sheets, whatever. In these studies, we show that the jobs that they are promising in these agreements aren't always coming to fruition, aren't always hiring local talent, and oftentimes are not getting your bang for your buck. For example, in the Harris County, Occidental received an abatement of around $70 million and only promised to bring 2 jobs to the region, right? And the study that we have sort of poses the loss of money, right? And I think you're probably right, there are other mechanisms that we can look to see where it balances out. But at the end of the day, these aren't like mom and pop oil and gas companies, right, who need a little bit of help to get started. These are billion-dollar industries that are already sort of having a a stakeholder position in these communities, we should center community needs, right, a little bit more, I would say.
So well, I would say related to that, and sorry, I would say related to that, when we in the Economic Development Corporation receive a proposal for a new project, we look at two things. We look at capital expenditure and we look at numbers of jobs created. One of the groups that we're looking at right now is talking about bringing 500 to 700 jobs to this area, which would be
short-term, long-term?
Long-term, permanent jobs. That's not including all of the construction and the contractors that would be in to build the site itself. And I think you're right. I mean, it is our responsibility as the people who are kind of the gateway to those projects to really assess, is this going to help our community? And hundreds of jobs and hundreds of families with more stability unquestionably helps the community.
So
now, I would also say I want to acknowledge Ms. Kim Golden, who is here. She's our planning and engineering director. Ms. Kim is a huge part of our process as we review these projects. She considers the environmental aspect. She directs them on all of their permitting and what they need to get from the state and what they need to get at the federal level. And I would say it's really a team effort because, yes, we're concerned with the economics. That's our job. But we have people on the same team that are very much concerned with the environmental impact, that are very much concerned with the human impact.
I just want to say one thing to this, and I'll be brief. I'm sorry. I mean, I think that's what this panel's talking about, right? Instead is putting the plans in place on the front end. So instead of talking about what isn't going to happen, is that we put the plan in place so that it does happen. Yes. You know, rather than stressing what the negative is, let's look at the potential impact and the potential win here. Exactly. So that's what the community benefits agreements and panels this group is supposed to do. That is talk about what those things look like moving forward.
Exactly. So I think there's some really good points that are here, and we've kind of are blending both the past and the current, right? And so in some cases, maybe the abatements aren't always paying off in the way that was promised, and then we also are hearing that there's other situations where maybe it has, and that's history. Mm-hmm. And then going forward with these carbon management projects, you're right, there's going to be public dollars co-invested because it's a new technology that we're trying to incentivize people to try, really, right, and to be our partners in developing. And so there's that split in it. And so we'll see what happens going forward. And I'm not aware of what the abatement structures are yet for each of those individual projects, if they've even sought abatements or not. I'm not sure. So we're not clear on that yet. But you brought up a really important point, which is the local jobs aspect. And how do we make sure that, and I think everybody here is talking about that, this is something that is positive that we would really like to have. And Randy, I really want to bring you into that conversation. How is it that we can actually get some local jobs out of these projects where people that are in the host communities are able to participate, yes, in the construction part, and also in the long-term jobs?
Yeah, from the construction standpoint on the front end, that's with project labor agreement. And once you negotiate a project labor agreement, you put that in place. Owner, contractor, everybody understands the rules going in. So one of those things can be X percent, 70%, 80%, whatever that number is for this community, whatever it can support, local hire. You know, whatever number you want to put on there. We guarantee health care. We guarantee retirement security. We guarantee apprenticeship and training opportunities so that these are not just jobs, they're career opportunities for people in these communities to learn a skill, to learn a trade, so that they can be long-term workers in that industry. And I think you can do the same thing with, you know, when you talk about local jobs at these facilities, that's a little tougher, but I think those, generally speaking, people want to live near where they go to work every day. And so when you incentivize that aspect of it, okay, we're going to put this here and we're expecting X number of people that are hired within this county, region, area, because these kinds of things, as to your point, 700, 800, 900 families, we're not talking just people, these are families, these are households. How many right now can it support, and then what do we have to do to grow that? So thinking, and that's what I'm talking, thinking about these things long term, putting these community benefit agreements in place. So we're thinking about workforce housing. We're thinking about things like grocery stores. We're thinking about because we have food deserts in certain areas. So we're trying to, what's that development look like around this big shiny thing? And incentivize, not just incentivizing that, but promoting that and encouraging the community to get behind, and the community development and everybody, because that's how you put, to me, that's what that's what a great community benefit agreement looks like. Jane Klebe, her agreement there, the one thing it leaves out in Nebraska is the workforce component. They never considered workforce on the construction or operation of the line there. We've been in negotiations with that owner for many months, trying to come up with an equitable agreement that we don't think is super fair up there. And those are where you have to have, I think, to me, all the stakeholders to talk about all these things as you move forward.
I'd like to touch on one of the points you made there about actually getting local people into local companies. Texas City has an incredible workforce development pipeline. Starting at the high school level, the city and the Economic Development Corporation have dedicated a lot of funds to having those programs at the high school level. So kids as young as 9th grade can start learning those trades, getting those certifications, continue at College of the Mainland, which we've also dedicated funds to allow students to go for their first 2 years for free through the Promise Scholarship. So by the time they do their high school education through the ITC and they move on to college, they've gained all these certifications they need to be able to just essentially walk in and be a plumbing apprentice, or walk in and get into carpentry, or on some of the industry themselves. And we've had potential companies come to us and say, when we look to really, if we pick your location, we're going to invest in workforce development, we're going to create courses, and that allows people in the community to stay and work in the community.
For me, I take a bit of a different framework. I think, even from the tax, benefit, right? We painted they're going to bring property taxes as the benefit, and then it turned into actually with the benefits leveling out, right? They're bringing in money, but we're also giving them some. It's kind of the same when we describe the benefits for like jobs, right? If an industry is looking to find a workforce and they're investing to build their own workforce, that's also a benefit to them, right? There is some side benefits to community, but we need to go deeper into what a benefit is and what a benefit looks like, and who is the community that is actually benefiting from this, right? Because as we were discussing in previous panels and previous days, you can say the labor workforce is a community, right? And then you can say the people who live next to the facilities are another community. And so we have a lot more work to do before we can sort of say that industries are automatically bringing benefits. Even in the example that we have was a $500,000 payment, one-time payment for a project which risks live way beyond that, right? And so we need to be thinking, and not just in short term, you gave us this money and that's a benefit. We need to be thinking about benefits as far as protections, and we need to be differentiating between a benefit that benefits a community and a benefit that's an investment for an industry, right? And to the jobs point too, I think another framework I have is we can create a huge workforce addressing all the carbon management projects that we have through energy efficiency, right? A third of our energy waste here in Texas is lost through just energy waste. That is a job waiting to happen with a workforce that is just construction workers, pipeliners, electricians. We don't need to retrain these people. We don't need to come up with a new standard for licensing. All these things already exist. And so if we want to have a good faith argument about creating real long-term good jobs, we should be having a conversation around energy efficiency and other carbon management strategies that aren't just carbon capture, that don't just require a lot of money and a lot of risk, right? So I think we need to have a more robust conversation about jobs that can be used to address the climate crisis.
So thank you for that. And there's definitely the opportunity that that conversation is to some extent being had in other rooms, not tonight's room. But I think it's important for all of us here to be kind of thinking about, what's available in all the different industries and areas of pursuit. But I want to dig in on a particular element here. And I think this is something that you're all mentioning in different ways, which is that, we're in different but very close stages within these different DOE projects. Some have been selected, or many have been selected, or in negotiation and about to be awarded, and then at that point they would actually start working and planning and so forth. And others have just been awarded and are in the very first days of having that ink on their paper. So what we're talking about is inserting into the community benefit plan development, and as it's moving forward, and defining benefits, and really negotiating and moving towards it from just being a plan and a series of milestones and into something that could be an agreement that's legally enforceable with community organizations, with the workforce organizations, or so on, other entities. So what I want to dig in a little bit is, what's the best way that, if you can have one of those project teams here right now and say, hey, this is what I think would be really great as a way for you to come and co-develop these benefits with us. This is what we want you to do. This is how you should come and engage with us so that we can co-design, co-develop these benefits together in pursuit of an eventual agreement. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it. At least on the construction side and the labor side, I think that's to negotiate a project labor agreement with the construction trades that are going to build the project that defines, as we've said, the Justice 40 initiative. We're heavily invested, all of the trades are heavily invested in ensuring the success of that. We're heavily invested in ensuring that these new technologies are successful, because to your point, we're having the discussions, and the idea about the weatherization and the efficiencies and fixing those things, that's a long-term ongoing project. It's about incentivizing, again, homeowners to take that next step. But that's another part of what a project labor agreement could look like. Okay, we're going to do training. We're going to have X number of apprentices are going to be required on this project. We're going to do these kinds of things. We're going to source our workforce from, we've got all kinds of models. We did one in Miami, on the tunnel project down in Miami. I believe it's going on a decade ago or so now, where the workforce had to be sourced from certain zip codes, a percentage of the workforce. And there was a weekly and monthly report that indicated, that was turned into the decision makers and the folks on the city council on where that workforce was coming from. So I think that those are just some anecdotal examples of things that I think from the labor construction side, a project labor agreement, from the long-term job aspect, it's also that kind of discussion with economic development folks, with the city, about what do these jobs look like, what do they pay, what kind of long-term benefits do they offer. And then, as you move into the other community aspects of this, and I am certainly not an expert in that, but we've had some experience with it, is doing things like, okay, working with economic development agencies and community groups and homeowners associations and everyone else to reinvest, and not just invest it for the sake of company benefit, but invest in the community with things like insuring grocery stores, daycare, all of those kinds of things are in place.
I think what you're getting to there is quality of place, right? Ensuring that when you choose a location for a new company, you can give your employees things to do on the weekends. They can have, like you said, stable childcare, stable food source, that they can be happy, And so in the city, the way the city comes into that equation is we have tourism efforts that kind of nail down, what are the hours that the dike is open, and what, you can go shopping at Tanger outlets, et cetera. And when we make pitches to potential companies, we include that so they know, not only is they're coming here creating a lot of jobs for us, but we would aim to make their employees' lives better by being in Texas City.
For me, it really is, I want to make it really clear that the current process of community engagement is insufficient. And we kind of talked about this yesterday and the day before. Texas City has a population of 55,000 people. I don't think any researcher would say that this random population sample of Texas City people is representative of community. it is hard to do that. And I'd say that as somebody who does community engagement for a living, it takes a lot of work. It is almost its own science, you know? And in whatever process we do develop, the one that we have right now does not have transparency of information. If a regular old community person came here and took a survey afterwards and had to just outline some of the facts that were clearly laid out by the experts, I'd be curious to know how much they really retained, right? How much they were really engaged with the data, how much they really understand the risks and the concerns and the considerations they should be having. And we need to also figure out the processes in which community can have accountability, right? You talked about that as one of your 4 pillars of what a community benefit should be achieving, but accountability is sort of a farce in the environmental world, especially in Texas, especially. I know everybody who lives in Texas and works in the environment understands there are very minimal, if any, regulations that protect the people. So the idea of accountability is like a pipe dream, right? Especially when if we recontext this whole crisis that we're in this crisis because we didn't have accountability of an industry who was emitting carbon for decades while knowing what it was doing to the crisis, right? And now we have these same people, these same industries who denied the science, we talked about science today, who denied their own scientists for decades, and now they acknowledge that climate change is real, and now they want to make sure that the carbon capture conversation is the only conversation we're having. That to me is not accountability. That to me is not setting anything up for accountability. And I think it's even important to note that CBAs are relatively new. We haven't really tested the enforcement mechanisms of CBAs, right? A lot of the research that I've been doing with CBAs, they're saying, you better put in a clause that says, if there's a violation, the industry that violated pays your court fees. Why? Because we all know that the court system is used by industries to scapegoat accountability, right? So for me, as a community advocate, as somebody who is trying really hard in good faith to show up here to express our concerns and to express what we would need to have a fair seat at the table, there needs to be a very drastic pivot. There needs to be a very drastic pivot in the goals of community benefits agreements, the ways it's going to work, and the way we engage community around it.
And so I'm hoping, thank you for those comments, and I appreciate you lifting up a lot of the concerns into the space. And I'm wondering, can you start sharing, like, what are some of the elements that you'd be looking for? So let's say, and not all of the carbon management projects are oil and gas companies either. So, not all of them carry the same history as some of the other industries. And so, what would be some of the points that you would like to advise them and saying, hey, when you come and engage with us, this is what we're going to be looking for to signal. This is how you're signaling we're on a good path to a CBA, or this is how we're on a good path to right engagement.
For me, it would be, if we're going to have events like this, at least half the room needs to be local people who are not connected to nonprofits like myself, and who are not connected to industry, or who are not connected to government agencies. I don't know how we could call any other event community engagement without having community members there, right? So we need to, I would say that needs to be something that we define clearly, what is community. I think also, the public funding, I think, is an important aspect of it. That is the only leverage that the public has in this process, is the fact that we are funding a lot of these carbon projects. And so what I don't see in the current community benefits agreement is, and I've asked this in multiple FERC meetings, DOE meetings, is at what point does the community have a right to say no? We looked at the benefits, we looked at the risks, and we decided, you know what? We don't want to take on these risks for this amount of benefits. I have yet to hear an example of a CBA that got denied, or that really sort of showed that there was an option to say no for the community.
I will just, a couple things I want to tack onto that the agreement is put in place after the negotiation. The Tallgrass project is an example of a community getting together and saying no, up until they got the agreement they wanted. I mean, that's, look, I know sometimes we use the word power as a dirty word, but it's not. I mean, this is all about who has power. How do you get power? Where do you get the power from? In Nebraska, that Tallgrass project was shut down because the community up there had enough power to stop it until Tallgrass agreed. And I think that's what we're talking about. And so but also I want to also say when these community benefits agreements they're not a relatively new mechanism. They've been used for decades in communities all over the country. They're going to be significantly more active now simply because through this administration, they're requiring them to be at least considered and put in place in any federal investment. And look through the IRA and the IIJA, there's just trillions of dollars in direct federal investment, but also in what we're looking at in the public-private partnership investment there. So they're going to be much more well-known and used because more people are using them, but they've been used around the country quite a bit. We can get you a lot of examples of that. But to your point, the good ones, you can stop projects when the community gets together and says, we don't like the agreement. I mean, it has happened. We have seen it.
So at this point, I want to turn to the audience here and see if there's any questions that people that are here with us want to pose to our panel members. I'm sorry? Or to Kelly, that's right. I'll invite Kelly back up here to the front as well in case there's any questions for her on her community benefit plan presentation.
Yeah, Louisiana has had a very pro-CCS governor and legislative actions, and they have primacy. And do you feel any tension that you will lose industries from this region to Louisiana?
I wouldn't say so because the industry has really vocally said that it's advantageous for them to build their carbon capture here because the industry is here, right? And I think that actually speaks to the leverage community has, right? This is easy for them because this is where all the oil and gas industry is. I've been on meetings with DOE and FERC who have explicitly said this is a great place for carbon capture. This is a great place for hydrogen because of the proximity to industry to be able to capture those hydrogen and carbon projects. So I would say that that Louisiana is an example of a really carbon industry friendly state that is already having some impacts that we should be modeling our safety protocols after. I think the argument about, well, the industry is just going to leave is not really rooted in a reality of community power, really. Like we have a lot to offer here, right? As you just said, the Texas City workforce is already skilled in these things. Like there's an advantage for them to be here, and we shouldn't be pleading with them to please, send us your industry. Yeah.
I'll, if I may, and I don't want to step on you. Of course, you're from here. Not being from Texas, so I don't want to say whether there's a concern about losing it. I can say we have seen in areas where the state and or local communities have not been willing to try to work things out. Industry has left. Just Illinois is an example. Large scale project up there that Navigator shut down. Just said shut it down because it was unable to get anything permitted and approved and done. Shut it down. Switched over to Summit Carbon Solutions has bought most of that work, and that whole project is moving up into places where they're a little bit more willing to work with them in South Dakota, Nebraska. So there is, I would suggest to you, and also look, the Gulf Coast over to Lake Charles, Louisiana has got a significant amount of the same kind of work. So, I think you do have to be mindful that, again, just like anything else, you can absolutely say, no, we don't want it, but then you lose it.
So I think I would want to follow up with that to say a couple of things. Number one, Texas City and this part of the Houston region is booming currently. We are getting a lot of companies coming in. I dealt with site selectors with a major company that was looking at Texas City and 2 other sites in Louisiana. They made the decision to pursue Louisiana, but the reality is those sites have the same hydrogen pipeline that we do. We're literally on the same line. It came down to which site was better, which had all of the benefits that they needed. But we were in competition with those sites for over a year. So it's not as if the site in Texas City was seen as less than or seen as less of an option. It was more just what were the little intricacies that made that the right choice for them.
Question in the back.
Just a quick comment. If we're talking about like preference of governors, the Texas governor is very pro-industry and very pro-oil and gas. So if we're comparing apples to apples, we're on the same ground as Louisiana in those terms. And as well as in the infrastructure. Infrastructure is huge here. And so talking about, going back to power, I'm like tying all the things together at once. My brain's going off. But we need to own our power. We need to be able to say, we have the infrastructure, we have the people, we have the desire from people in the community to get these jobs, to have these industries. So that is a fact. And so what we don't need to do is grovel. We don't need to take the least, possible offer. We need to say, these are the risks, this is what we have to offer, and then negotiate from that stance of power, because that is what we have. And so that's one thing that I wanted to mention. And to the point of the industry is booming, yes, it is. Here in Texas City and in the Houston region, Harris County region, the industry wants to expand. And so our concerns are also tied with that we want to make sure that mitigation is there. We want to make sure that safety is there, because if the industry wants to expand, CCUS is only going to mitigate part of that. It's not going to be a benefit in terms of environmental factors. It's going to be a mitigation. And so we have to take that into consideration as well, because these industries cause irreparable, in some cases, damage to our natural resources that belong to all of us, all residents, all community members, even those who don't want to work with industry. And so, okay, I'll wrap it up. Sorry. I did a quick search on like Texas City, and there are areas, and of course you have to look like within certain miles of radius, but there are some areas where 51% of people are low income, and the per capita on average is $26,000, $26,476. And so again, considering the fact that we do have such a robust infrastructure, considering the fact that we have this labor force, we can't be taking this. This isn't not acceptable, in my opinion, because this is similar to my community, which is, I don't know, 20 minutes away or something like that. Except for there, the average life expectancy is 54. And so at least here, the average life expectancy is not as bad. So those are also things, if I live 20 years less, that's a lot of money that I'm losing out on. So if we're talking economics, life expectancy matters, resources matters, because if not, we're gonna have to fix those on the back end. And so anyway, I just wanted to give that feedback as a community member, as a concerned person, as someone who's impacted by the industry because of my health. My health is impacted. I just really, it's less of a question, I guess, maybe if you have a comment on what I have to say, but that's my perspective. Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you so much for that. To the point about taking back power and communities having the opportunity to be proactive in this space, I just want to speak to some of the resources and technical assistance available to communities in advance. So we recognize that in addition to carbon management and other projects led by FECM and OSED, there's a lot of DOE investments happening in the region. So to address that need for some coordination and capacity and support to communities themselves to be able to keep track of all these projects and to put forth their own strategy of what do benefits look like here, how does it recognize our history, and how do we want to be engaged with. The Energy Justice and Equity Office is leading the Regional Energy Democracy Initiative in coordination with other offices who are having projects in the region to develop a regional consortia of organizations with this expertise, including legal assistance, workforce expertise, as well as representational organizations across the region to do that coordination and develop that strategy. In addition to that, outside of that specific initiative, there's a community of practice growing among those folks who are providing that TA. So Reimagine Appalachia has a great resource catalog of community benefit agreements. There's other resources available. I'd love to talk and point to some in Montana where there are critical minerals, CBAs being negotiated with specific profit sharing. That I think just learning from all the examples, being able to pick apart what's missing is really useful for us to discuss. But I just wanted to speak to that and that need, that recognition that support is necessary, and there's an opportunity for communities to put forth their own priorities, their own benefits, their own outline of how they would like to be engaged with.
I want to take a second and acknowledge Jose Boyce, who was here. I don't know if he's still here, but he runs the Community Advisory Council, which gets no fewer than 100 residents every time they meet, and they meet every other month, in the same room with the heads of our industry, where they provide reports about what's going on the site. They provide information about available jobs. Those industry heads are also consistently in communication with both the Chamber of Commerce and, as well as the city, to be able to advertise those job opportunities to our residents. So that's something that I think a community can initiate themselves, is a vehicle that allows for those conversations to not just happen once a year or once every 3 years or just before a project is happening, but regularly, and to create that comfort and to create those direct lines between the resident that could be interested in a job or has concerns about safety and the groups that can directly answer those questions.
So I realize that we are running short on time, and so I want to be respectful of that and make sure that we have time still for the networking and informal conversations between people here, and including our panelists. So I want to close with just asking each of you maybe to provide a 1 to 2 word answer if you can. What are you hopeful about going forward? You can say it either with regard to community benefits plans, this type of engagement that we're trying to help here. What's something that you're hopeful about going forward? And then I will invite everyone to thank our panel. So please, Kelly, you first.
Okay, well, I'm hopeful from, that we are all learning from these engagements to make it better and improve, and that the community benefit plan framework is putting forth a new set of standards and expectations for responsible deployment of energy projects.
I am hopeful just from the people in this room and, talking about owning your power and those kinds of things, because that's how we make change. And the people that show up are the ones that make change. So I'm excited and hopeful about that. I do want to take one point of personal privilege, if I may, and she just walked out again, but I just wanted to personally thank, she's walking, Emma Crow-Willard, for putting this thing together, for setting it up. Just please help join me in giving her a hand. So thank you for all of this. And I want to thank all the panelists and speakers and everybody. I've enjoyed the heck out of this for the last 3 nights. So thank everybody, and thank all of you for coming back out.
Kristen.
Everything he said. Also, I am hopeful that having additional industry, carbon capture or not, can help areas like Texas City fix some of that difference. So working on that median income through workforce development efforts, working on connecting people with available jobs so that they can support their families. That's the whole goal and the whole mission behind economic development, is creating jobs. That's the whole point. So we hope to be a part of that.
First of all, I'm grateful. Thank you all for putting up with my feisty questions, my pushback, and my interrogation of these things. I'm hopeful in the sense that we can normalize this, right? This is not an easy thing, right? To bring the only kind of counter narrative in a room full of people who have paid positions to advance a certain goal, right? Industry, if I'm being radically honest about my position, industry is obviously here to make money, right? That should be no secret. Government as well is here to fulfill their jobs and their roles. I am hopeful that we can continue to have these radically honest conversations and not shy away from them, and instead build bridges to better understand and build about our common world vision.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hopeful for our continued dialogue and collaboration, and I think we learn so much when we do disagree and we work to address the concerns that arise. And I think that the more that we're willing to face disagreements and the more that we're willing to face conflicts, but in a respectful way, the better we'll all be. And so with that, I want to thank all of you for being here, and please do ask DOE folks and anyone else that you've had a chance to meet here for advanced collaboration. But with that, let's thank our panel. And with that, I'll invite Emmanuel to take us home.
Okay. All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate everybody's participation. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to be here. We still do have a few minutes just for some more informal networking, exchanging contact information. I also want to be respectful of the folks who work here at the facility. I know lots of folks have to pack up and get moved out and things like that. So we're going to ask everybody to try to be as quick as you can. And we're going to make sure that we close up the space on time. So thank you, everyone, for coming out today, and we look forward to continuing conversations on these important topics.